It's not here, so are you going to do the staff? And is that what principals trying on that? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call to order this hearing of September 6, 2023 in matter of CU-02-2030 Hillsboro House. Continued hearing. My name is Joe Turner. On the panel with me this evening are Wall and Aaron Lewin will be the deciders on this single item on tonight's agenda. We have a request for a conditional use application for Hillsboro House Ballpark CU-003-23. An introduction and an explanation of how this process is going to work tonight. We who serve on the panel are appointed by the City Council to decide on certain land use applications in the City of Hillsboro. I'm a land use attorney. I've got fellow board members or residents of Hillsboro. It's our responsibility to provide an independent evaluation on these matters, since none of us are city employees. Ultimately, we must decide if the applications presented meet or do not meet the applicable approval criteria based on standards in the city's community development code on the date the application was submitted. We review the application, staff report, and comments provided ahead of the public hearing and public testimony provided at the public hearing. I'll note that tonight there is no opportunity for public hearing, it's just deliberations. We've already taken public testimony. But the board is placing emphasis on effectively addressing the issues in which we're engaged in a respectful and timely manner. We ask all parties to hearings and administrative matters during our meetings to assist us with this emphasis by participating in it, correcting and relevant testimony and comments. And again, that's not relevant tonight because it's just deliberation. I think the rest doesn't apply because it all talks about testimony. But anyway, moving on to the public hearing, do any of the board members wish to state any ex parte context for conflicts of interest for tonight's agenda item?
Aaron Lewin, board member. No, I don't have anything to report.
Thank you.
Me.
Okay, I don't either. So the one item on our agenda tonight is a request for consideration for conditional use to allow the construction of a new major assembly facility within the Oregon Paper Recreation Complex in the IT Industrial Park Zone. So it's very, you want to tell us where we are, I guess the way we're doing it. Sure.
It's Hearing Officer Turner. My name is Chris Graham, I'm the Development Services Manager of the Planning Division here at the city. And I'll be covering the staff report this evening, primarily for Ruth Klein, who is the Senior Planner who's presented to the board and have been present at the last two meetings. So following the meeting on the 16th, the board had established 3 7-day periods in which written testimony and evidence was to be provided to you and to the public. So those 3 periods, the first 7 days was from August 17th to the 23rd. And that was a period of time when the record was kept open and new testimony was able to be submitted. During that period of time, there was an email provided from K.L. Wambacher from the Hops, as well as a memo that was issued by Joe Spoth, Transportation Systems Engineer, who's also with us this evening. And those were provided to the board and the public in a memorandum that Ruth issued on August 24th and is online. Also want to mention for anybody that's here in person, there are hard copies of all the memos that I'll be referencing over near the testimony table if anybody wants to snag those. So that first 7-day period closed on August 23rd. With that new testimony, that was the end of when the new testimony could be submitted. The second 7-day period of time from August 24th to the 30th was an opportunity for anyone that participated in the hearing to respond to that new testimony. And during that second 7-day period of time, staff received an email from Denise Kerr, who had a letter that was written by an attorney, and that email and letter were provided attached to the memorandum that Ruth issued on August 31st. And then the third 7-day period was from August 31st to today. And that was the 7-day period where the applicant had the opportunity to provide their final written argument to the new testimony. And that memorandum was issued by Ruth and I, dated today, and had the applicant's final written argument that was issued by AKS. So that is attached to the September 6th memorandum. So the purpose for this evening is for you as a board to reconvene and deliberate and issue a preliminary written decision. The public is not allowed to speak this evening, nor will any additional testimony be accepted. You can ask staff questions, and I want to indicate that also with us this evening is Dan Diaz, who's the Economic Community Development Director, who was present at the last meeting. And then a new member of staff that's with us this evening is Chris Crane, who's the city attorney. So Chris can help us with any legal questions that might arise tonight during your deliberation. Also want to mention to the board and to the public that 2 of the board members received an email from Dirk Knudsen right before the meeting this evening. That was new information that should not be considered in your deliberations, as it was received outside of the 7-day period of when new testimony could be submitted. So I just want the public to be aware that that's how we're treating that testimony that came in this evening. That concludes staff presentation this evening. Here to answer any questions that you all may have. Thank you. Robert.
I thought the best way to approach this was just to walk through the applicable approval criteria and discuss each one as we go. So the Community Development Code section 1280.020 specifies the approval criteria for a conditional use. First one is the proposed use is listed as a conditional use in the underlying zone. It appears to me this one that major assembly facilities are allowed as a conditional use in the industrial park zone. Anybody have any comment on that?
No, I also don't, I agree.
We find that that criteria is met. Okay. The second criteria is the proposed conditional use complies with any special use standards for that particular use that are set forth in subchapter 1240 if applicable. Those are addressed in detail below. We can make a determination whether that standard is met based on what our discussion of whether our finding whether the approval, but specific criteria are met. The third criterion for conditional use is whether approving the conditional use would meet some public need or convenience. I think I'll start us out. I think that those, without this project, the house will leave the city because Major League Baseball requires that they provide, the hops provide certain additional changes to the existing facility, existing ballpark, and the only way to do those is through this new stadium. So I think losing the hops would be an economic and recreational loss for the city. So I think it does provide some public need or convenience. There was some argument that the hops only benefits a small portion of the population, that the city is serving all the segments of the population. This facility would also be available for other types of recreation. So it does provide some public need or convenience. And the last issue I thought of on this was that the lots of the existing fields is kind of contrary to this public need or convenience because those fields are going to go away, but that is a temporary impact. They will be replaced by the city at some point. And there was testimony that even during this temporary loss, those many tournaments are going to leave the facility, may not come back, but given the lack of fields in the region, I think they're likely to return once these fields are completed. The replacement is completed, so I think it's going to be a short-term loss. So on balance, I think the standard is met. Do you have any thoughts?
Aaron Lewin, regarding approval criteria number 3, I am unsure as to the first thing that you had said regarding the loss of the hops if this application were to be rejected, because I don't believe that this is the single and sole possibility for the Hobbs. While other options are not within the purview of this application, I think it's worth noting that this is not per se the only option available to the Hobbs, and that other options exist to continue to be looked at were this application to be rejected. In addition, with the loss of the 3 fields, I believe one of the pieces of testimony that was sent in to us through tonight's meeting packet includes, I think it was actually part of the printed out testimony that we received during the last meeting, was from one of the tournament organizers who stated outright during that letter that if those 3 fields were to be lost, that tournament would not be returning to Hillsboro. And I'm unsure as to whether or not it is the same tournament organizer or a different one. However, in the meeting notes for Parks and Recreation with the August 16th meeting packet, one of them was stated that they were being courted by other locations, and the other of which decidedly stated that they wouldn't be coming back if there was a loss of the fields. So I'm not entirely certain as to the possibility that these tournaments will come back.
Criteria number 3 is honestly the most problematic for me. First of all, it would meet some public need or convenience as we're Hobbs public. It's meeting Hillsboro Hobbs's need and convenience. And I think using that interchangeably with public is not sitting well with me. And I think, so that's the first thing. The second thing is from trying to formulate what I would say here is that, yes, this new stadium is going to bring in jobs and revenue, and that is great for the public and beneficial for the city. However, I do think that we have not, or the applicant has not fully done an economic study, in spite of the fact doing the economic study for stadium, so solely without any context to it, did not justify the public need. By that I mean that if the stadium was a standalone, we don't know where the site is. It's a great stadium. Yes, it'll bring jobs, it'll bring lots of revenue, lots of opportunity for public to justify public need. But looking at the stadium, what is taking away the loss of the fields, the fact that there's going to be this place right next to an existing stadium, how is all of that sitting with the economic land is what's most problematic for me. And I tried to ask these questions to the applicant last time. Is there like a delta? Has there been a study as to what's going to be lost and what's going to be gained? And is there any way to look at that to figure out if it's truly justifying the public need? And I did not hear an answer for that or any kind of justification for that. So I feel like criteria, I know we have other issues like parking and all of that stuff, but this being from that background of planning, urban design and architecture, this is what's sitting wrongly with me in this application. And that's my problem with it. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any response to Carter's? Allowed to.
Aaron Lewin, I'm still trying to formulate a more complete answer, but in general, I think I'm seeing a lot of the points that Ms. Dalal is making. I think there is some merit to what you're saying.
I argue the opposite, that, not the opposite, but the fact that they're a private entity, agreed. But they're providing a recreational opportunity for the public to go watch them. So I think it is benefiting the public because it's something to do. It's a passive recreational opportunity, which is what the standards, public need or convenience. There's a need for entertainment, passive recreation. A concert is going to benefit the promoter, but it doesn't benefit the public because they're going to go watch that. A festival, again, promoter gets benefits privately, but the public gets the opportunity. It enlivens the city.
I agree with what you're saying, but like, for example, with this project, you're talking about a community park or affordable housing or any of the other stuff that would truly benefit, truly public would benefit from it. I now what you're saying. Going and watching a concert or a Hawks game or basketball game, I'm having a hard time seeing that as public need.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I do see what Mr. Turner is saying. While the definition of public need or convenience, to my knowledge, is fairly broad, I mean, I do think that does encompass the kind of entertainment needs that the Hops, that the proposed Hops ballpark and the Hops themselves would provide. However, I think like I've said before, as given to us in the supplemental materials for the August 26th meeting, or perhaps it was the July meeting, I forget which one, it's all blurring together. It was stated that there were other options that were being considered, but simply that this one was the most economical for the parties involved. And again, while those options are not within the purview here, I am simply noting that this is not per se a do or die use of this land, that there are potential other options to be considered before the Hops decide to potentially leave Hillsboro.
Going back to Mr. Law's argument about that partner housing is a greater need, agreed, but they couldn't be provided, housing can't be provided here in industrial.
I agree.
But, and the issue before us is whether this use provides some public need or convenience, not whether it would be better to spend money on housing. Those aren't financial concerns that we get considered. It's just, we have to consider what's currently before us. Does this facility provide some public need or convenience? Whether other ones would provide a whole lot more is something we need to consider.
So while we're considering whether this particular project and facility provide public need, are we also considering what we are taking away from?
Yes.
I know we're considering that, okay, government the loss of use of the existing ball fields, and did we consider the loss of economic aspect when Brown Town did not function as well as the ball fields will be transferred to another place? The whole.
I think those are relevant because they are directly related to this project. The loss of the ball fields is definitely that. The applicant and city park staff argued that the Montauk field can be repurposed for public use and other concerts, other activities. So I don't think it's going to be mothballed, so to speak, the Montauk field.
Right, and the plans for that are vague.
Yeah.
Also, yes, there is no specific plan of how we will be able to, or how are we going to look at the school complex together and how to function together. We know that not more than 7,000 people can, 7,000, yeah, but I feel like the plan for all of it together, and as well as singularly just for this new stadium is vague and not specific and not addressing the issue which is taking away from the justification of some public need or convenience. Some public need or convenience, well, Ron Tonkin means that, right? It is some public need or convenience, and it's exactly the same use. So the some public need or convenience is working for Hobbs. They cannot use Ron Tonkin because they are changing.
Yeah.
Which is why it's problematic.
Louis, can you expand on what the alternatives you think are available for the Hobbs that they're not going, that they may not leave if this is denied?
Aaron Lewin, I believe that the primary alternate consideration was the renovation of Ron Tonkin Field to continue to meet this standard, essentially transforming Ron Tonkin Field into what the proposed Hobbs Ballpark would have, which is possible. However, if I remember from the supporting documentation from prior meetings, the estimated cost would be closer to 160 to 180 as opposed to the estimated 120 for the construction of a new stadium on fields 4, 5, and 6. I would believe that there may be other opportunities on other parcels of land, but that's pure conjecture, and I don't think that that's that my opinion here is directly related to that.
It was my understanding based on the testimony that if they, in order to modify Ron Tonkin, the biggest problem is there's a 66-inch water main that has to be relocated at several millions. Just Barry, can you tell us what the exact number was on that? Or Mr. Diaz, or roughly, if you don't know that off the top of your head, that's okay, but it was a rather substantial number.
And can I just add to that? Interrupt,
Yeah.
but repurposing Ron Tonkin, yes, it would be more expensive if we would have to move that line, like the city would have to, but the cost of removing these 3 ball fields was not considered. So if you add that with that, it will be less than that,
I agree.
which is also not we are not supposed to look at the cost and all of that stuff, and that's not what we're looking at. But we're talking about where else could Hillsboro Hobbs put their stadium. This is one of the big
The only
issues.
further thing I was gonna say is that these arguments of the applicants told were that moving that 66 water line is gonna cost a whole lot, but there's no benefit from that cost. It's just that and it will also cut off water to supply for some period of time while they move it.
But we don't know all of that.
That's what's in the record. It's the testimony from the city and the applicant that I think there is evidence and there's no evidence to the contrary that moving that water line, it can be really expensive and difficult, and there's no benefit from that. You have water now, you have water later, it's just in a different place, but you spend a lot of money to move it. And I think that's the primary.
But the benefit of that would be that you won't be building a big stadium and you won't have a lot of use for different things. Well,
Right.
but that would be the benefit. That's
Yes.
I agree that it's hard to do the pros and cons of this. What is this and that when you don't have exact information and you're not supposed to look at it. We don't have how much exactly it's going to cost to do that, and we don't know how much exactly it's going to cost to move those existing wall fields or new location, what costs in terms of construction costs, and also costs in terms of everything else, and even if it's a viable solution, we don't know that.
Aaron, then I'd like to quickly cut in to mention that there was an estimated cost for the replacement of the 2 fields, being, and this is a wide range based on what I remember from the Parks and Recreation meeting notes, that the cost estimate would be somewhere between around $8 million for one field to up to $20 million for both fields, depending on the kind of turf they're planning on using, whether it's natural or artificial, as well as the location of the replacements. So we do have an estimated cost for that I think the city would be factoring into the costs associated with this as well.
To respond to Chair Turner's question, I'm not going to try to remember off of a rusty brain the exact number of gallons going through the pipe, but I will confirm it is a 66-inch line, as you noted. I'll also just point back to the question around the replacement of use and evaluation. When evaluating approval criteria, as I think Attorney's Officer Turner trying to navigate is, we are evaluating this application as to whether it meets those criteria or not. And remember, you do have the ability to place conditions of approval where you believe it's largely satisfying criteria or there's an impact. And I would just remind that staff did include a recommended condition of approval number 6 that talks about the evaluation related to the loss of use fee. So there's been a lot of discussion here. I know we've got many approval criteria to get through this evening and to try to support the board. But just to remind the board that at least in staff's recommendation, there is that condition of approval to, in our findings, we believe that there is, a finding of support here, but that condition also takes it an additional level to continue to advance and refine that loss of use and the replacement to mitigate that impact that hearing board member Halal is raising. So I just want to flag that.
The other point I would make is there was a economic impact from Eco Northwest that they submitted. And then there was another economic impact from the Northwest Nations, that the tournament provider. And there was the Parks Department's wasn't as detailed on economic impact. There was some economic impact analysis there. But the Eco Northwest study concluded that this new stadium is going to generate substantially more than those tournaments. So I think if we're looking at just the financial benefit to the local economy, I think got the different criteria. But it is, since we're talking about that, I think there was argument that Eco Northwest overestimated some of the attendance, et cetera. But even if you cut it by 10%, it's still substantially more than the loss that would be from those, the economic loss of the three fields, and that economic loss will eventually be replaced if they recreate those fields elsewhere on the site. But again, I don't think that is directly related to this criteria, but for the fifth use, it provides some public need or convenience. I think we can talk about that when we come back to that. On actually one more issue on that standard. This would allow this use aligned with many of the Hillsboro 2035 initiatives as aligned in the applicant's July 19th memorandum, that it expands the inventory of community event facilities for community events, festivals, family activities. It encourages plazas. It will provide a plaza, which is one of the goals, is to encourage plazas. Initiatives as encourage plaza streetscapes, green spaces for community events. It does provide a plaza that can be used for community events. That it's aligned with that goal. It provides an outdoor amphitheater for larger events and concerts, which is the city goal of that 2035 initiative. It creates a local regional destination park. That's kind of arguable. It does expand recreational opportunities and facilities because it's providing a new facility that doesn't exist. Also opens up the opportunity for Rontonkin to be used by more public, the general public more often. And then the last standard was the initiative goal. It doesn't really specify what they're titled, but it's coordinating with community partners to increase sports and recreation opportunities. Again, the freeing up Rontonkin does provide opportunities for that, but also loss of those three fields conflicts with that particular. I was just in my notes, wanted to throw that out there. Anybody have any thoughts? Great. Okay. Finding for the characteristics of the site, size, shape, location, topography, and location of improvements and natural features are suitable for the proposed condition.
Aaron Lewin, one of the stated possible uses of the stadium is for concerts and other such gatherings. And I'm not entirely certain that the use of the stadium for concerts would necessarily be in line with the character of the recreational complex.
So.
I struggle to articulate my exact feelings on that, but I think that the Gordon Faber Recreational Complex as a whole is focused on sports. While we have seen some other uses, such as I think graduation ceremonies on the Hillsboro Stadium football field, it's simply been a point of contention, I think, at the previous meeting as well. That was something that was brought up, and so that's something that I'm continuing here.
To add to your point, is it, or ask you a question, is it because the way it's the design of it, or is it just the idea that it's for sports and it cannot be used as a sort?
Not that it cannot be used for a concert per se, but that it feels to me that a more, and again, I apologize for the lack of articulation that I'm providing here. It doesn't quite feel to me as though the recreational complex, like the second option that you were saying, basically, that, yeah, that.
Yeah. It would have been nice to probably get a precedent or an example where a baseball stadium has been used as a concert hall, just to see how that actually even works, because you can just say, hey, you can use this for this and this and this, but how do you figure that out? I'm sure there's a way, but the idea that you're doing sports and that facility and all of the things are related to sport, and then we're saying, okay, we need to do a concert. I can see where you're getting that hesitation for changing the use so drastically, but I think historically, stadiums have been used, sports stadiums have been used for concerts, so that's not so much of my concern as to.
I think, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just one point here is in terms of drafting findings or preparing findings, the criterion D4 is focused on, quote, the characteristics of the site, end quote. I was just going to say, is the site too small? Is it close to a bird sanctuary? Is it too steep? The findings have to address sort of the characteristics of the site rather than the existing use.
Yeah, I agree. And it does go on to say the size, shape, location, topography, and location of improvements and natural features are suitable for use. What the use would be, concerts aren't related to the size and shape, topography. The stadium, the issue is can it fit there?
Okay, I recognize that.
Yeah. And it's related to concerts. To bring that into that criteria, arguably the noise, given its location, would be an issue. But it is surrounded by these existing stadiums that can be used for concerts. It's also surrounded by industrial uses and Highway 26. The nearby, looking at the map, it's about 2,000 feet to the nearest residential. So I don't think the noise is going to be, the characteristics of the site's location in relation to residential uses isn't going to be noise isn't going to be an issue for that.
I recognize that. If it's possible for city staff to answer, has there been prior use of either Ron Tonkin Field or the Hillsboro Stadium for concert use in the past?
I'm afraid that would be new evidence, but
Okay,
yes, I don't.
retracted.
Yeah. The loss of the field, I think, does relate to this standard because the characteristics of the site or the existence of those three fields. So it is contrary to that standard to some extent, but again, they will eventually be replaced. Also, this site contains, this is staff's finding, but I agree that there are surface parking, vehicle circulation patterns. Transportation system around this is designed to get people in and out of this parking area, which will be used by this facility and the other facilities. So it is increasing the use of an existing facility. So that is the benefit, that it has these a large parking lot that can accommodate up to 7,000 spectators. So I think that argues in favor of that criteria. Do you have any further thoughts? Or
Can I just add one thing? So the proposed conditional use we are looking at is for our stadium. We're not looking.
for a stadium,
Yeah, you're not saying for concert, you're saying.
but a stadium that can be used for a variety of activity. I think that's what the applicant's argument is this isn't just a hop stadium. It will, the hops will use it a lot, but other activities, recreational activities, concerts, graduations. There are a lot of options that can occur.
Turns officer, trying to just clarify, the conditional use that you're considering is for a major assembly facility.
Right,
Not
that's
your
that's your stadium.
Yeah, if you'd like, I can reach the characteristics of a major assembly facility and examples of uses from the code. That would be helpful for you.
Yes.
So major assembly facilities are uses that attract a large number of people who participate as a group in a specific activity or event that may be religious, cultural, social, or recreational. The distinguishing characteristic between a major and minor assembly facility is maximum occupancy. The maximum Oregon structural specialty code occupancy within the primary assembly area of a major assembly facility is equal to or greater than 250 persons and less than 250 persons for a minor assembly facility. Examples of uses are churches, synagogues, mosques, or temples, auditoriums, coliseums, stadiums, and sports arenas, convention and conference centers, fairgrounds, racetracks, and outdoor amphitheaters.
The board is correct that you're evaluating that use and the structure and the programmatic components that have been shared in the record, which do include events, venues, corporate activities, which back to the question, consistent with the record, I believe it was shared by the applicant. Into that, I can speak to that, having reviewed that, and then work these investments. The Gordon Paper Complex has been and continues to be used for sports activities as well as other community events and gatherings, activities and the like. So just to kind of round out the definition, the question that is in the record.
Yeah, as I recall, the reserve annual corporate picnic attracts 3,000 people or something. And they use this facility. So it is not this facility, not the one that's proposed, but the existing facilities, the Gordon Paper Complex is being used for other than sports activities already, in addition to the graduations that were noted. Criteria 5, proposed conditional use will not change the character of the surrounding area in a way which limits or precludes the use of surrounding properties consistent with the provisions of the underlying zoning. So as I would read that is, it won't have, it may have impacts, but those impacts won't prevent permitted uses. For example, they won't prevent you from living in your house because the noise is too loud. It won't change the character of the area to such an extent that those properties can't be used for permitted uses. But do you have any thoughts on that one?
Only thought I had that one was that it would, so right now, going back to traffic, we're 7,000, right?
Not trips, but spectators.
Spectators.
Yes, so multiple people.
Spectators allowed. Adding this would mean that 7,000 would be, it would include this new stadium. then that would mean that the others might lose out. So if there are like concurrent activities happening at the same time, like Hillsboro Hops is playing at the same time, there's a concert around Duncan, and at the same time, there's something happening in the stadium, so there might be a loss of use of those areas. So that's my only concern. We're adding this but not changing the 7,000. If you were adding this and saying, okay, we'll change the 7,000 to now 10,000 or something like that, then that would make sense. But you're just keeping the same limitation, but you're adding a whole new big stadium on this.
Reading over some of the new information that's been presented to us for tonight, I think that in large part the issue of traffic has been sufficiently explained to the point where I do understand why, for example, traffic impact analysis is not required. However, that has continued to be a sticking point in my mind that, again, I'm not quite certain how to articulate, in the sense that with another large facility, with, yes, under the 7,000 spectators, I believe a maximum of 6,000 seats was being considered for this new stadium. Something about the possibility for there to be multiple large events being increased with the new stadium. We already have a fairly large Hillsboro Stadium for football, and then we have the currently existing Ron Duncan Field. Adding another large spectator capacity, I think, increases the possibility of us potentially running into situations where we have the space to accommodate multiple large events, but we would be running up against the 7,000 spectator capacity. Even with one of the conditions of approval that is being proposed, I believe that's number 3, with the possibility of limiting the number of days that the maximum spectator capacity could be lifted as an exception. I feel like it's still, in a sense, I feel like the stadium might be competing with itself, with the larger Gordon Faber recreational complex, in the same way that, say, multiple hardware stores on neighboring blocks might eat into each other's competition, that sort of thing.
I see your concern. I'm not sure how it relates to this, that it will change the character of the surrounding area.
I was attempting to respond to what
yeah.
Mr. Law was saying.
I definitely see your concern there. It may relate to a different criteria.
If you're saying that the state, Ron Duncan and Hillsboro Stadium are surrounding properties, it would relate to that. In my head, maybe, I'm not saying. Well, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you overhead. I can hear you just fine because I'm sitting next to you, but I'm not sure the audience.
Sorry about that. I was just saying that if we are talking about the adjacencies, the surrounding adjacencies, you're not talking about the neighborhoods, which is the Ron Duncan, Hillsboro Stadium, the new fields that will come up. It would limit the use of that. That's what is the traffic, the spectator, it would limit the use of those.
Yeah,
and
that's
that
the
is
cap.
the cap.
Yeah. But the applicant and parks, we get information from both applicant and parks, that I don't need to conflate them, but they both provide information about that issue that often the hops rarely fill up the existing stadium, which I think has capacity of 5,500. So there is, they know what roughly the attendance is going to be, and then they plan events based on that. So if the hops are, hops are playing this night, whatever that is, they're using 3,000 of that 7,000 capacity. You still got another 4,000 left, which can be used by a different facility on that site. It's very rare that the 7,000, they even come close to the 7,000 capacity.
But that is kind of contradictory, right, to the economic study, which is saying that we build this big stadium and we'll have it with lots of people coming in. It's not going to be the same as us and Ron Duncan. It's going to be much more than that.
And then the applicant, or the artist is saying we can schedule
Right.
ahead of time. We know this night, the hops are gonna have no idea who the hops might play, but somebody, there was discussion about Portland State versus Montana, I think. That's a big draw at the football stadium, and that's when that 7,000 capacity cap is hit. So they would know that they could predict ahead of time this event, whatever it be, like whether it's a concert, PSU, or a concert, whatever would happen on that night. It's not gonna happen all the time. So that that night, that facility either may not get used, or that would, whoever is doing the big event would have to provide the traffic and transportation analysis. And
Which is what they're talking about, is limiting the use of the other property.
yeah,
Because they would have to.
it would limit it, you're right, it matter how often it would occur.
Right, well,
Very good surrounding area. So you're saying we change by providing a new facility that's consuming the capacity, the 7,000 spectator capacity, that would limit the use of those other properties. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Under that standard, noise wasn't raised as an issue, but it is exempt under the code because it is under Hillsboro Municipal Code 624.050 exempts city-owned and operated facilities from, and that's a policy choice by the board. Mr. Knudsen cited to the dog daycare, which we considered as a board, and the noise from that required a sound study. But I think dogs are a lot different. You can put limiters on sound system. You can not turn it up to 11. Dogs, you don't know what they're gonna do. You may have a whole bunch of large dogs that have deeper voices or louder voices or whatever. I think that's, I don't think noise is gonna change the character, even if it is exempt, and it's the Parks Department noted the applicant and Parks noted they're gonna design this facility, and it is a public facility, so they have a strong interest in making sure it doesn't have significant adverse impact because of noise. Again, it's also separated by the parking lot, freeway, and industrial commercial uses. The lighting, I don't think will have an adverse impact because it isn't exempt, because it doesn't meet the height standard of the exemption. Therefore, it is subject to review by the city, but that is a that can be through a separate process through the development review process. The code does require that they provide a lighting plan expressly provides that, and that be reviewed through a public process. But I think we could add a condition of approval if we approve this, that they provide a lighting plan through that's subject to at least a type through review through the I just said it, the development review process. So I think lighting won't have a significant adverse impact. Traffic, we talked about that the 7,000 capacity, spectator capacity limit, those trips are assumed to be on the road already. They may not happening every night, but any subsequent development had to consider that traffic as being there. So I don't think traffic is going to change the character of the area. Parking was also raised as an issue again. The trip cap will ensure that the existing parking was deemed adequate when the Ron Tonkin was approved for up to 7,000 spectators. This won't change that, so the parking isn't going to, again, your argument that it will limit the other facility because you're consuming what's the available part, a portion of the available parking. We can talk about that again. And then the other issue that was raised was increased stormwater runoff. And I think it's feasible to accommodate that consistent with the code, and that will be addressed through the development review process. Code is pretty clear and objective on that. stormwater standard, have to collect, treat, and detain stormwater. And it will be reviewed, through a different process, so I don't believe that stormwater runoff is gonna have a standard was change the character of the surrounding area. Anybody else have any other additional thoughts on criteria 5?
No, I think I agree with you, other than the spectator
Sure.
limitation, everybody else.
I think I would agree as well.
Number 6 is the proposed conditional use addresses the adequacy of transportation systems and public facilities and services that exist or are planned for the area affected by the use. Staff's finding was a traffic impact analysis wasn't required based on the 7,000 capacity cap. I would also note, I think the city noted this in their memo, that section 1270-200B of the code required land use applications submit a traffic study as required by the review authority. Here, the review authority didn't require one because it's subject to the cap, and that traffic is there and considered by subsequent analyses. I don't think that we're going to change that, so I think that criteria 6 is met. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Aaron Lewin, I agree.
Me too, yeah.
I also have the Century Boulevard extension under this criteria, because it does relate to traffic. I don't believe that criteria, that extension is relevant to this project. It's not proposed as part of this project. It's totally independent. It can happen with it, but it's likely to happen. City plans for it to happen, right? Whether or not this project occurs, this project is just going to require to dedicate right away for that project if it occurs. So I don't believe that was raised as an issue in the public testimony. I don't believe it's relevant to any of the criteria. Anybody have any contrary thoughts?
I agree with that.
Criteria 7 is proposed conditional use satisfies any applicable goals and policies in the comprehensive plan. Staff's finding is that overall the proposed major assembly facility satisfies the goals and policies, and it lists a number of policies. I think the best way to approach that again is just going through those policies that they've listed and any other ones that anybody think is relevant. Public involvement, goal 2, the goal or policy said respect and cultivate community diversity and wisdom for inclusive, meaningful, and innovative community participation. You have thoughts on that one?
Erin, do you have any thoughts?
I think that the what was stated in the July 19th packet, all of the goals, I think it stated clearly that it needs at least one of those. So I would agree that the 7th criterion is met.
Overall, I think on public involvement, there were multiple opportunities for public involvement in this project. The applicant held a neighborhood meeting before they submitted the application. As the city noted, they broadcast it on the social media sites and the city's newsletter, and it was subject to public hearing before the city council, parks department, and this board. Mr. Morrison's July 19th and August 1st memoranda also expand on that. I think that it is consistent with public involvement. There was an argument that there was inadequate notice of the board's hearing, and that although it meets the specifics of the code, it doesn't meet the spirit of the law. But the spirit of the law is the basis for denial. The city has to provide the notice consistent with the code. We can't require more. We don't have any authority to require that they build a facility elsewhere, which was an issue that was raised and kind of falls within public involvement. Whether it's better to remodel the existing facility, I don't think that's within our purview either. We have to review what's been proposed. I agree that the, I wouldn't say loss, but reduced. The Tonkin Field is there, so that is an existing use. It does relate to other criteria, but I don't believe that whether it's better to remodel it is an issue we get.
I agree. I was only mentioning it in response to what you had said previously about the possibility of the hops leaving the area
Sure.
for this not to be approved.
Yeah, that fell within this, in my notes, that fell within the public involvement standard, that when that issue was raised.
I see.
And then there was a request for a public vote, but clearly we don't have that jurisdiction and isn't relevant to the approval criteria. And then there was in the latest round of public comments, there was an argument about the Parks and Recreation Commission not approving this. That's not relevant to the criteria before us. It's not something we get to consider. So the next goal that was raised by staff was design and development goal 4 policy D, that activate the public realm, support the interaction and activation between the public realm and adjacent development and uses. Broad goal. Any thoughts on that?
Not at the moment, not at the moment.
I think the phrasing of activate the public realm is a bit strange, but I don't have any specific objections to that goal being met.
Parks and Recreation Goal 1, opportunities, policy PR 1.3, recreation opportunities growth. That's what it says. Increase recreation opportunities consistent with the city's population growth while maintaining a balance between active recreation and passive recreation.
I think that there's a potential for the balance, at least in the short term, to be offset between active and passive by increasing or by removing field 4, 5, and 6.
That's the right word I was trying to come up with. I know exactly what you're trying to say. Its scales are going the wrong way.
Right.
It's not.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I just want to make sure I can understand what I wrote in my note when we get to that point. The urbanization goal policy 2.3, development consistent with zoning plans and agreements, support new development, infill development, and redevelopment in a manner that maintains compatibility with surrounding areas and is consistent with adopted zoning relevant community level plans, partner agency plans adopted by reference, and incorporated into the comprehensive plan, formal intergovernmental agreements. I think projects consistent with zoning is allowed as a conditional use, and there's no evidence of other plans or agreements, so I don't think it conflicts with that goal.
I would agree.
Agreed.
And then policy and sure why it says NM. Policy 1.2, noise management. That's why NM is noise management. Goal 1, land use compatibility. Ensure compatibility between land uses by separating and buffering noise producing and noise sensitive land uses through land use designation, zoning, and site design. Any thought on that?
No, I think that this criteria has been addressed and
It is clearly exempt from public noise at the public stadium, and it's a policy choice by the board, and it does meet.
Keeping it in mind that this space would be exempt from noise standards, then yeah, the criteria would be met.
In policy ED 1.1, economic development goal 1, competitive advantage, maintain and strengthen the city's competitive economic advantages, including access to a highly skilled workforce, vibrant local workforce development, business diversity, competitive business climate, quality educational institutions, and globally competitive public facilities, utilities, and services. I think this is where the competing economic analysis comes in.
yeah, I agree. I mean, that's where, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about it again, but yes, the stadium is bringing in all of that economic gain for the city, but we're also at the same time, and that has not been measured, losing not equal amount maybe, but I don't know how much, but we're definitely, there's a competing economic friendly or competing economic, I don't know, right?
There's a benefit, there's a loss.
There's a loss, yeah, and the loss has not been, the benefit for sure has been, everybody knows the benefit. But the loss is not really being addressed. Holistically, I mean, it has been addressed, saying yes, cities and building stadiums, we will have all of it back again, but it's not holistically being measured against the game.
I think adding to that somewhat, I did see in tonight's meeting notes that a plan has been submitted, but I am not aware of any details of that plan, so it remains a.
For replacement of the fields,
Mhm.
yeah, and that's something, the plan itself, I don't think is something we get to consider, it's just that there is a plan for replacement, so.
Depending on the interpretation of the competitive advantage, which I admit that I'm a bit murky on. There is also something to be said for the loss of a relatively unique location to host the softball tournaments, that those 3 tournament organizers were being interviewed about.
I agree, but I do believe that it's short-term impact until they can be replaced. I know,
A short-term material loss for sure, because the field will be replaced. However, at least 33% of those tournament organizers have stated that they do not plan to return if there is any loss of use of those fields. So while we will eventually gain those fields back, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to regain what we have currently in terms of support from other tournament organizers.
and I know that was their testimony, but I'm not sure where else they're gonna go. That's, because there was a lot of testimony, but there isn't enough fields in this area. Well,
At least one of the tournament organizers that was mentioning this during that meeting at Parks and Rec, they had mentioned that their tournaments have people coming from multiple states.
Mhm.
And so I have to imagine that in surrounding states, there would be other opportunities that we're not aware of. But also I would say that the ability for them to back up their statements is not necessarily as relevant as the possibility that we will not get them back, which I think is very real.
yeah,
I agree, and that's well said.
but again, the Eco Northwest estimates that this project's gonna generate 64 million a year in economic output for the county, for the county globally. The Northwest Nations estimated they generated 876,622 and 900,000, so basically 1 million in 2023. So for the tournaments to equal the benefit of the hops would be 64 similar tournament providers. So I think it's a much bigger benefit from the hops, but from this facility, not the hops necessarily, but this facility in general, on the local economy, and there will be a short-term loss of those 3 fields and the economic benefit of those 3 fields. If those tournament providers don't come back, I would expect that others will. But I don't know that, but that's my thought process.
I would hesitate to only consider the economic impacts of this stadium and the loss of the tournament organizers. Speaking from broader experience than specifically Hillsboro, for example, the Portland Kaohsiung Sister City Association's Rose Festival Dragon Boat races has seen a marked decrease in the number of teams that are attending, thus impacting their ability to continue financially as a result of COVID-19 and the quarantine preventing them from hosting tournaments for 2 years. What I mean to say is that I think that there is a cultural impact to consider, more so than just the economic impact. As a Hillsboro citizen, I personally find it more important to consider the human aspect of losing these people coming in and interacting with our local culture. there are people, at least according to one tournament organizer, I don't have proof of the statement, but he was saying that there are at least 6 states, including Hawaii, that some teams come to Hillsboro for the Ron Tonkin Field for the GFRC for the tournament. And there are a lot of people that can come here, that can come and interact with our culture, that can fall in love with the city. I think there's a lot more to consider than just the economic impact.
And then sustainability goals was raised, and Mr. Morrison's August 1st, 23 memo, I think addresses that they will address that through the design of the building with energy modeling, building envelope efficiency, and other design things that will reduce the environmental impact of the building. Any thoughts on the sustainability? And that brings us to the criteria specific for the standards of places of assembly, which is 1240-10D. The first one's compliance with applicable codes and applicable international building code provisions for exiting, fire suppression, ventilation, and sanitary facilities. I think that's going to be addressed in the building preventing process. It's not something I think that's clearly can be done. There were concerns about evacuating the stadium in the event of a shooter or similar major emergency. I don't believe that's relevant to conditional use criteria. That will be addressed through the development review process and design, the police, the fire department on the design. And it can happen at any of these facilities that are there already. The next standard would be parking and internal vehicle circulation. Provision of adequate parking for circulation is specified in code 5300. I think we talked about that there's an existing parking lots and access circulation, and it subject with the 7,000 trip cap. It's adequate now and will be adequate because it will still be subject. Criteria 3 is not, it only relates to residential zones, so that's not applicable. Criteria 4 is height. It's climate objective standard. They can meet that. And when you need any discussion there, any criteria 5 is relates to elementary school, so you have to go there. So that's all the criteria. Do you want to go on to the conditions?
Sure.
Okay.
Do we need to revisit any of the, I think we know the issues with the application and maybe we look at the conditions, revisit the criteria.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, so sure.
The first condition is requiring that they dedicate the right of way for the future Century Boulevard alignment. I don't think there's any thought. Yeah, critical issue. Second was the applicant has to pay a fee in lieu of constructing a half-street improvements on Century Boulevard when the site exceeds 7,000 spectator capacity. Again, they're not adding traffic, so we can't require them to contribute, pay for additional traffic improvements until they generate more than allowed.
Is that, I have a question about
Mhm.
that one.
Mhm.
If there is more than 7,000 on a particular day, and that's not only because of Hillsboro House, but if it's like multiple things happening at the same time.
Sure.
Would it still be that the applicant will pay the fee in lieu, or would it be?
There wouldn't be a fee in lieu because that fee in lieu is only if those traffic impacts would be addressed in different ways through their shuttles, off-site parking, through that transportation plan that they have to provide. It would also, if it's that impact fee is based on developments are required to pay impact fees to mitigate their traffic. So if you're adding traffic to the road, you have to mitigate that by constructing, improving your frontage. Here they're not adding traffic, but with that additional capacity that the frontage improvement provides is there during rush hour, which is the primary time it's needed. Here, most of these events are gonna occur weekends, evenings during off-peak hours, when there's additional capacity on the roadway system itself. So I think that actually is that transportation, parking and transportation plan for larger events is using that excess capacity that's not currently being used during those off-peak hours. If it's beyond a certain point that they have to do, it's gonna exceed the capacity, they either aren't gonna be approved or they're gonna,
Fee.
that because the fee is a long term, it's not one event.
Right,
If they exceed, it took more than 36 days, they have to pay the fee. But otherwise, during those, if we went with this condition during those 36 days, if they did it that often, they would have to provide a transportation and parking management plan.
and the 36 days is
Is
what we come up with
yeah,
today.
and what
With the
staff
state.
is recommended.
May I briefly point out that in condition of approval number 2, there are 2 situations in which it says when the site exceeds the 7,000 spectator capacity more than 36 days in a calendar. Are we assuming a calendar year?
Yeah, I think we should add that.
It's both on the 4th line
Good
and
catch.
then on the second to last line.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And if we approve that, I think we definitely need to add those words in.
I did have a question about the fee in lieu. I think it's just something that I don't understand, not being, familiar with codes or anything like that. The applicant is the city of Hillsboro. Which body is this fee in lieu being paid to?
To the transportation department.
Okay, so what aspect of the city of Hillsboro is paying this fee to the,
Parks, I assume. Generally, if instead of a fee in lieu, you build sidewalk and frontage improvement, you do pavement, sidewalk, curb, gutter, stormwater, half-width streets,
okay,
so instead of building it, you pay a fee,
right, so,
which the city can then use to build that improvement. And they would build all of it at once rather than this section that abuts this site.
okay.
So it's arguably more efficient.
So just to confirm then, some city of Hillsboro arm, potentially Parks and Rec would be paying the fee in lieu to the, to the traffic department?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the title would be, but whoever built the roads.
Right.
Yeah, and whoever's planning that road.
Ultimately, the fee will be paid to our public works department that manages all of our transportation funds and fees. It will come, I don't know the specifics from the applicant's side, either from Parks and Rec or some combination of the applicant pool that's presented for you and in the hearings.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. Condition 3. The applicant shall submit a traffic, and this is the part of traffic, if you have more than 7,000 spectators, what do you have to do? The applicant proposed some amendments to that. That a traffic I think there are amendments that are proposed to clarify this criteria. I don't think it changes it, but currently it says a single event in one stadium. Let me back up. If you can generate more than 7,000 spectators, you have to provide a traffic and parking management plan 4 weeks in advance of the event. But that 7,000 spectator is further refined as its plan isn't required. Single event in one stadium or a concurrent event in multiple stadiums aren't generating more than 7,000 spectators. You're not exceeding that cap across the GFRC. Staff had a condition. That's what the applicant had recommended, that we change that first line. It originally said a single event in one stadium not exceeding 7,000 is exempt from the parking requirement and the plan requirement. And then concurrent events within the existing 2 stadiums or the proposed new baseball stadium that attended below 7,000. The applicant just recommended that we combine it a single or concurrent exceed 7,000, I think if we approve it, I think that would be an appropriate change.
Yeah, I think that I would agree with the proposed changes that the applicant has suggested to criteria 3. However, I think that we should also talk about the let's see. I believe it was the request from Parks and Recreation. It seemed like they had a potentially conflicting request that I'd like to talk about. I think it was on, let's see, this was, looks like it was dated August 30th. It's the very last.
Not exactly, but it was the last day. That's AKS. Oh, no, I'm sorry, with the color, I just assumed it was AKS. Go ahead, you're
Yeah,
right.
The Hillsboro Park and Rec
Yeah.
memorandum, they are, from what I remember without reading the exact wording again, they are looking to have that criterion removed. I think because of their prior experience in managing the spectator capacities at the GFRC.
You're right. Thank you for raising that one.
And I'm curious what both of you think about that one, because I definitely see the merits in keeping criteria 3. I think that leaving it, what I've learned from the last case that I was here on, leaving things vague or not specifying things can lead to problems further down the road. So I see the merit in having criteria 3. However, I do see the merit in Parks and Rec's experience managing GFRC.
So as you, I'm just asking if you agree with Tom reading that the parks wants to eliminate the 36 event cap, but limit. That anytime you can make it limited, exceed 7,000 spectator capacity. Sorry, I need to move closer to the mic. They can exceed 7,000 spectator capacity more than 36 times, that they have to provide the plan, and that Parks has experience with managing such events and would be able to accommodate it. So there's no need for that 36 event limit.
That's how I'm reading what they're
Yeah.
saying, yes.
Okay. And did you agree with Parks? Is that what you're?
Well, I'm raising it because this is
Yeah.
an additional aspect of the criteria that we should discuss.
No, I agree.
I don't know enough about Parks and Recreation's history. I'm not, for example, an employee there or anything. But I do recognize that they have had existing authority over the management of events at the recreational complex. As to whether or not I agree or as to what I think should happen, unless there's a good argument from either of you two, I would propose that we keep criteria 3 in place.
With the 36
If we want to modify that and in
or some
one way or
kind
the other,
of numbers.
some kind of limit, I think, because there still is an option to exceed that limit, pay the fee in lieu and conduct the traffic analysis or whatever it was stated as. Let me double
They
check
pay
that.
that fee.
Traffic and parking management plan.
But
No,
the traffic and parking
analysis.
management plan has to occur anytime they exceed 7,000.
Okay, yes, but the development review application shall include a traffic impact analysis.
Oh, right.
Yes,
So,
if the
yeah.
applicant wants to conduct single and concurrent events.
So they would, because they would be increasing the traffic more frequently, they would need to do a traffic analysis.
Right.
And they would need to pay that fee in lieu.
So generally speaking, I'm in favor of keeping criterion 3, whether or not we modify that, that's a separate conversation that's about to be had. But I wanted to know what you and Mr. Lowell think about about the request that Parks and Recreation has.
Yeah, I was just looking at this, so. I still feel that 36 is, yes, it's 10% in the year, but it's an arbitrary number. It's not really based on anything. I like what Parks has suggested here, but I also think that anytime 7,000 or more spectators spectators, if you're expecting more than 7,000 spectators, then we should do a traffic impact analysis. I mean, the 36 technically should be 0 in this case. Is the most stringent way of looking at it. I understand why we have 36 and what the logic behind that is, but that number is is not really anything. It's not based on any data as such. It's just the 10%, or we can say 5%, or we can say 25%. I'd rather do what Bharat has suggested and say anytime we have more than 7,000 spectators, we do all of the stuff that we're saying, plus there will be a traffic. If we are expecting that it is rarely going to happen or never going to happen, then we should not even be talking about 36 days or 5 days.
I think it does occur now, and they deal with it. And if we eliminate it, if you're over 7,000, you have to do a traffic study. Would only apply to this facility, so we would shut down this facility. They could still have events at Ron Tonkin and the football stadium that
Exceeds 7,000.
Yeah. So
And we cannot put conditions on those.
right.
That has been an existing source of confusion for me is specifically the focus, while the application is specifically for the Hop Stadium, there has been a lot of discussion, and I think that some of these criteria do include wording for the overall complex, including the proposed adjustments that were offered by the applicant, my bad. So I am a bit confused as to exactly the limitations that we can, or that are put on us as to whether or not we are applying criteria to specifically the Hop Stadium or
The Gordon
or
Favorite Complex.
the associated favorite complex that it resides in as well.
We can't condition the complex, we only condition the stadium. But that's the only reason for us. The others have existed and have been approved.
I recall during the last meeting, my apologies if my recollection is wrong, but during the meeting, there was talk about the applicant having offered essentially criteria 3, which included information for the GFRC, and I'm trying to remember more specifics about that.
If I may, I can provide some clarity here. So
Please.
I would ask you to look at condition 3 as a voluntary condition. The applicant agreed to provide restrictions on the entirety of the complex. So while staff completely agrees with you that what's in front of you this evening is a new major assembly facility, the applicant in the discussion with staff was willing to put restrictions on the entirety of the complex that led to the conditions in front of you, notwithstanding the memo that came from the Parks and Recreation Director that was asking for a slight deviation from that.
I see.
So that's where the interplay of the entire complex relative to this condition comes in. The other thing I mentioned on the discussion about the difference between where planning division staff recommended the condition, then what the applicant team came back with refinement, and then the memo from the Parks and Recreation Director is that Parks and Recreation Director is not saying that they would be submitting a traffic impact analysis for every event. They are saying that they would follow the existing process, which is a traffic and parking management plan, which is a much less detailed analysis. So if you were to follow the current process, that is not a full traffic impact analysis. If we're wanting to not provide any additional events to go beyond 7,000 for the new facility and require a TIA, if they ever exceeded that for the new facility, then that's where you would be nudging that new facility to go through a development review process to provide a traffic impact analysis once they exceed 7,000. And then the tie-in with the previous condition is once they do that, then they are going to be conditioned to pay the fee in lieu for the frontage improvements along Century. So there's an interplay between those two conditions, which is important for you all to consider.
Yeah, that'd be the next issue I was gonna ask. If we eliminate the 30, as Parks requested, we eliminate the 36 limit. When would, if ever, would they pay the fee in lieu?
Yeah, I don't know that the Parks and Recreation Director was looking at the interplay of those two conditions. And just reminding the board that the way that planning division staff recommended them, there was an interplay. So if you reduce the limit to 0 for the new stadium, and then the first time they want to exceed 7,000, they're going through a development review process and then paying.
And they have to do it once, right? Not every time.
Oh, correct. Yeah.
So just to reiterate what you were saying, Mr. Berry, the criterion 3, it was a voluntary, criteria of approval that the applicant themselves proposed. And that is why it potentially governs the GFRC as a whole.
So a couple things, and it's just, I'm gonna get this nuance because we're into very hyper specific terms. So the number 3 is a condition of approval. It's not an approval criteria, so those are two.
Prior to the meeting, I was having the same difficulty
No worries.
delineating those two terms.
And I wouldn't describe it as an applicant recommended condition. It was an interplay of back and forth between city staff and the applicant, which is also city staff, but coming to an agreement on providing a restriction that we were all comfortable with. So that's what I'm saying. It's voluntary in the sense that the applicant was willing to agree to it based on the back and forth. And that's not any different than negotiations that we have with other applicants on conditions.
And sorry to interrupt, like, and the applicant is the Parks Department in this case,
It's technically public works.
Public Works.
Correct.
right?
Absent that 36 event limit that the applicants agreed to, we have no authority to impose any conditions on the existing facilities. Correct. Of Ron Tonkin and Hillsboro Stadium.
I don't believe you do. I think you would be putting your decision on a slippery path if you were to restrict the ability for the other 2 stadiums to exceed 7,000 beyond what the applicant was willing to.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, I don't think we have that authority. So if we eliminate the 36, you can't have more than 7,000 at this facility, but we couldn't have more than 7,000 overall using this facility. They could still have more than 7,000 overall at Ron Tonkin and or Hillsboro Stadium. And so I think although the 36 does seem number seems arbitrary to me, it is something that would give us the ability to limit the use of the other facility. So it would reduce the frequency of such large events, and it would also give the city a handle on when and to require that payment of that fee in lieu. Otherwise, I don't think it would ever, because they would just continue to use the other facilities.
Do you find that, so the applicant is putting a condition on the entire complex?
They're agreeing to do that. We don't have the authority to require that to impose conditions on the entire complex. The applicant has the authority to agree, well, we're willing to do this, and if they're willing to do that, we can impose that condition. We just can't change that condition beyond what they've agreed.
So I'm just thinking about what they are agreeing to do. So they're agreeing to impose a restriction on the other facility. I am finding that like an issue that the applicant is imposing restrictions on the other facilities when they don't have any, right? So that's going back to the criteria number, whatever, about exactly.
That was changing the character of the surrounding area.
Right. So I'm just thinking about it in that sense, like if the applicant is putting a condition on the other facilities, wouldn't that be an issue? Because that's saying that, hey, we can't do this with night, right? Like restricting their current use which they have approved for.
Yeah.
If I can, on approval criteria number 5, the specific language says the proposed CU will not change the character of the surrounding area in a way which limits or precludes use of the surrounding properties consistent with the provisions of the underlying zone. So I don't know that, I would say this from the staff perspective, we do not see the other stadiums as surrounding properties. It is the same property.
That's true. I think the site is in your
Is
favor.
it the same? Does it have its own tax lot description? Are there like separate properties or is it just one whole big?
So the tax lot boundaries are a little complicated. If you look at tax map, the tax lot lines actually go through the stadium in Ron Hopkins Field, so they are not singular in any way currently, but when they go through the development review process for the new stadium, they will receive a condition to consolidate tax lots, which has been a more common condition with recent approvals, which wasn't always the case. So when this went through approval in 2012, there wasn't a condition to consolidate tax lots, but there would now be. But if you just look at it beyond tax lot boundaries, because tax lots don't necessarily mean legal lots either. So
And is there like a legal like, so I agree with that you're not considering this as a strategic, it's one big complex. We can look at it holistically, but then that would also mean that we can look at it, that we can impose conditions on this whole law. But you're saying you cannot do that. At the same time, the applicant is doing that.
So to give it a little bit more context there, when Ron Tonkin went through the approval process in 2012, the code was different. That allowance, so the reference that you see in the conditions of approval to a DR, that meant that prior stadium went through the development process rather than a conditional use process. The prior code did not require this extensive of a process for the Ron Tonkin field. So if you think about it this way, that if you, beyond what the applicant was willing to agree to through this condition of approval, if you use this conditional use process to impose limitations on approvals that were granted under a different code, then you're starting to impact their vesting and their land use rights. So that's, and, you know, Chris can speak to that a little bit deeper detail if you'd like him to, but that would be a large concern for staff if we start going down that.
You wanted more expansion on that?
No, I think I understand that what happened, but I still feel like we're looking at one thing in one way and then we're saying that it's all the same property, but then we're saying it's not.
I agree that the interplay between different between different city of Hillsboro departments and the specific building that the application is based on, but it being regarded within a larger property, I think that is definitely confusing, but I think I do understand what Mr. Berry has been saying.
So if it helps, the project site is the two tax lots, right? Those are the subject properties, but there are different uses that have been approved pursuant to different permits on those properties. What Mr. Berry was saying is the existing sites have existing permits. We can't limit those permits without affecting their entitlements for those permits. So the site is those two tax lots. Condition number 5 is asking, what about the surrounding area?
Criteria number 5.
Right, sorry. I know better too. Criteria number 5, C5, is focused on the surrounding area around those two properties. Right, so the criteria is focused on the properties that surround these two properties. What your discussion is looking at is, can you condition two existing uses that have existing permits, that existing entitlements, and absent the consent of the applicant? Probably not. But the applicant in this case has offered to go ahead and limit themselves in ways to help manage the traffic. But criteria number C5 is focused on the properties that surround the project site, and the project site consists of 2 tax lots.
Okay, so then in that case, criteria number 5 does not concern itself with the other fields so much as with the other IP buildings within the zone.
Correct, the surrounding industrial properties and so on.
Okay.
Are you forcing a change on the neighbors, basically?
Yeah, I guess it gets a little confusing when the applicant is the city.
Certainly.
And everything is the city. If it were not the city, if it was Hillsboro Hawks who was a applicant and not Public Works, this would definitely be a lot more problematic than it be.
No, not at all. I mean, we get private sector developers offer up conditions all the time. They want to get the permit approved. They say, well, we'll go ahead and do this, do that. We know you can't require it, but we're offering it. We say, fine, write it down as condition of approval, and that becomes part of their permit. If they're gonna offer it, we'll take it. And it doesn't matter whether the applicant is a private company or the city.
But would they put conditions which will negatively impact the surrounding uses and you would accept it? Like, for example, if this was a private entity and they would say, okay, nobody is allowed to have more than 7,000 spectators. Even though right now
They have
they're
to own
allowed.
those other facilities too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So-
Hawks would have to own those other facilities.
Right, but right now, so the applicant is Public Works and the city owns everything.
Yeah,
But the use of it is gonna be, the ownership of the stadium is gonna be, or contract is gonna be with the Hawks, that they're gonna control the ownership.
The proposed stadium is going to be to my knowledge, continually owned by the city.
yeah.
However, it is going to be leased to the Hawks upon
For
construction.
use. Okay.
But it's the city that's agreed to the condition.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right,
To restrict the city on the property. And so it's the applicant, property owner agreeing to that restriction. It's not the Hops as a tenant agreeing to the restriction. And even if we receive an application from a tenant, they are required to provide the property owner's signature. And in turn, ensure that the property owner is agreeing to the restrictions as well. So in this case, the applicant and the property owner are one and the same.
Can I suggest we take a break?
I'll second that.
Okay, to come back in 10 minutes for after. Okay, thanks. Tonight. I think at this point, we should ask the staff have any feedback as far as our guidance.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. There was one thing I did want to mention about the approval.
Can you say your name for the record?
Sorry, it's Chris Crane with the city attorney's office. I was looking back over the criteria when the discussion was going on about D3, the public need or convenience criteria, and that I do want to point out that the way that it's phrased, with approving the conditional use meet some public need or convenience, it does not imply a balancing test or a weighing of benefit versus detriment. So for example, it does not say would meet some public need or convenience that is not outweighed by a detriment, or on balance meets some public need or convenience. It just asks the simple question, does it address or provide some public need or convenience? Just about any use is going to involve some level of detriment, whether it's traffic or displacing some other use. The question is whether there's a public need or convenience, not whether there are also detrimental aspects of a proposed use.
Anything else? Any other comments?
It's just about the City of Hillsboro Transportation Systems Division. I just wanted to clarify, as you received in your packet, there's a memo from me from August 23rd, 2023, and in there I listed the previous case files that it's associated with the site. And I just wanted to clarify that the past case file, the DR 2612, did put a limit on the spectator capacity for both the Ron Tompkins field as well as the Hillsboro Stadium for that 7,000 spectator capacity cap, and that the proposed condition from the city, which is condition number 3, is basically a mirror of that condition with the addition of the proposed baseball field park. And so I just wanted to point one thing that this is currently what's kind of vested upon this site, and that we, in this condition also, that the previous case file condition, didn't have any limit, as your team pointed out, but we are looking at, like it's said, like the arbitrary number of 36, just to ensure, as we mentioned during your testimony to the public, that we are not going, the applicant is not going to exceed those events. And as others point out, that there's one from the letter from AKS, which is dated September 1st, that looks like it's going a little bit more stringent, of requiring the whole entire site, and then the other one from Dave Miltich from Parks on the 30th is going to return back to the original condition of approval, where, as you noted earlier, that it was unlimited, but it includes the three proposed parks. I just wanted to provide that clarification.
So should we go back to the criteria again? And if we have any further thoughts based on what we said so far. 1 and 2, one is met, 2 is just refers to the places of assembly criteria, which we can talk about. So 3, that as Mr. Craig noted, it does. I have to agree, it's not a balancing test. It has to meet some public need or convenience. I think, like a movie theater, any recreational facility is going to provide fulfill some public need or convenience. So I really think that's met. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, let's just talk about it for a minute. I agree with that. It needs the definition of some public need, but then there has to be a threshold for some public, or threshold for the definition of some public need. I mean, we can argue that any project that we take upon can meet some public need. Can literally argue that, or I can think of any project that would meet some
Private
public.
concerts in my backyard, I don't know that that's a benefit.
Your neighbors, neighbors can listen to the music.
I invite my friends, but it's not for the public need. So because these tickets are available to anybody. I
Right,
think it's a
but
public-
if this project is taking away from the public, the existing public need, I think that needs to be accounted for. If the stadium was just a standalone stadium where nothing's getting affected somewhere in Hillsboro on vacant land, or in a brownfield or greenfield or whatever, without any other context to consider, then I agree that it would meet public need, and it would definitely meet some public. If this project was, if we're repurposing the existing Round Tonkin for it, it would meet some public need. But here we do have to think about what we're taking away from public. Like, I know it's not about balancing the scales, but it's also about like understanding that we are building this project next to these other uses, but also on top of an existing use which also needs some public need. So I think independently we can say yes, this project, but if you look at it, we just need to look at it comprehensively, like the whole picture. And that's what I was having trouble with the some public need.
Erin Lewin, board member for the record. I completely agree with what you're saying, Mr. Crane. That is definitely how it's worded. I see what you're saying. I also agree with what Ms. Bilal has been saying. That recognize that it doesn't seem to be included within these 7 criteria. But because this stadium being proposed to be built is overlapping with a previous public need or convenience and is in some way reducing that, I'm not sure where it fits in, but I do think that that does have to be considered to some degree. I'm imagining a scenario where on Hillsboro city land, hypothetically speaking, there could be multiple conditional use applications for multiple different stadiums over however many years, and as long as they meet these criteria, then they would be accepted. But at some point, there is a diminishing public need that is being met, in the sense that, for example, here we already have a stadium that can meet some needs. There is some level of consideration, I think, that we do have to find for the loss of the 3 fields, even temporarily. But I am struggling to figure out where within these 7 room for that discussion is to be had.
I completely understand Ms. Joe Turner, I completely understand Ms. Golal's concern. But I don't believe it falls within the scope of this criteria. We have to use the words that have been adopted by the code, that approving the conditional use will meet some public need or convenience, period. Not on balance, not being considered, on balance, I think is the best way to phrase it. So I don't think, while it's not an unreasonable concern at all, I think that it just doesn't fall within this criteria. It might fall within one of the other ones.
That makes sense. I was just thinking, sorry, while you were saying that, I was also thinking about this justification from the applicant team regarding the economic. One of the justifications for meeting some public needs is the economic impact, the increase in revenue, increase in jobs, and all of that was part of the justification for meeting some public need. But like I said, I think I've said it before, that
I think that falls under the economic provision, not just public need.
I did read it as maybe it was from, I can go and look back at the document, but creating more jobs, creating more money, but that definitely, yes, 100% may need some public need, and we need it, and agreed, there's no doubt about it. But again, it does not meet some public need if we don't consider the project, what it's replacing and what we are taking away from it. So that's yes, stadium standalone, you put it right here, without anything, it meets some public need. But if you're saying that this stadium, which is placed next to another stadium, which is of the same use, used by the same folks, and then we try and say it justifies meeting some public need, especially when it's taking away another public need, that's when it becomes an issue. Again, if this was an application for a site where there was nothing around it and was not replacing anything, it would meet some public need 100%.
But I think to go off of Mr. Frank's example, if say, I think of an amusement park was replaced, if a private amusement park was replaced by a private movie theater, that's a choice for the applicant of what to do with their property. But it is a public benefit. A movie theater is public benefit, a carnival is public benefit. Other recreational uses that may be there that are being replaced are public benefit, but that's not what the standard says. It's new use, is it providing a public benefit, period. I don't think we get to balance on this criteria.
Mr. Turner, maybe I could give you a relevant example. The Hobbs are here because they got kicked out of what is now Providence Park. And so clearly there were enough people who believed there was a benefit converting Providence Park to a soccer stadium, even though it had the negative effect of removing the minor league baseball team that had been there for a long time. So it's hard to come up with a use that provides public benefit that also doesn't have a downside. The other thing I might add is that, frankly, Member Dalal, your point is a good one, that almost any use could be it could be argued has some public benefit, and maybe that the criteria is not well worded or any of them to accommodate that consideration. But you are stuck with the text of the criteria themselves, at least until the city council takes the time to revisit and revise them.
You want to further discussion?
No, I
Okay.
think we currently have any other feedback to that. An explanation.
Erin Lewin for the record, I do agree with what Chris Crane is saying. I feel that we as Hillsboro citizens and not necessarily as members or as employees of the city or any other kind of official agency. I mean, I think that it's very valid that we are considering these factors. And I think that on a citizen appointed, board where it's people like us and not, for example, people like Mr. Turner, who is a professional land use attorney. I feel like there should be some room in the conversation for what you've been saying. However, I do concede to Mr. Crane's point that is not within the 7 criteria that's before us, unless we seek to perhaps make an argument for another criteria. I don't think that criteria 3 meets that.
I think that's something, if we don't get to it in the different criteria, something that can be raised with the board, that criteria should be clarified or to allow for additional criteria added to allow for that kind of consideration.
It's also like, it's a generic criteria,
It is.
right? It
I
can apply
totally
like to anything.
Some
and
of these
it's
are
so generic.
very generic.
But that's the reason why we are here, to understand. We're not just saying, hey, look at this, meet some public need, but we are here looking at.
But that's what the
kind of-
code that the city council adopted says. We don't get to add words.
Well, then what is the point of us being here if we're not allowed to use our?
Like, the board, it's been adopted. It might, I totally understand your concern and agree, but it's not, I don't think it falls within the scope of that criteria.
Okay, we can continue the discussion.
So I think
Next
Chair
one.
Trevor made one quick point of order, sorry to interrupt the train of thought of the board, but just back to Mr. Crane's point that I just want to be cautious, first of all, that we don't enter new information to the record related to cops leaving Portland or not. And I also just want to clarify a statement. I hate to do this. That was the Portland pickles, not the hops. So if the board can just strike that entire bit of.
Yeah, I think we'll
That's
just
fine.
leave it.
Go back to the train of thought, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
So on criteria 3, I think at least 2 of the 3 of us agree that it's met. You don't have to,
Yeah,
Agree or
all right,
not?
yeah, of
Okay.
course, yeah.
I just trying to work our way through this, so we're gonna have to come back to that. Number 4, characteristics of the site, size, shape, location, topography, and location of improvements and natural features are suitable for the proposed conditional use. Here, I think that your concern about the loss of the fields clearly falls within that. I think that the size, shape, location, topography, all, it works. There's room to put this in there. There's parking and transportation improvements to get people in and out and to attend these events. So I think those are all suitable. The issue is on balance, whether the fact that there's 3 other ball fields there are going to be temporarily eliminated. I think on balance, that characteristics of the site are not met. That's the question.
I can see some argument being made that while there is physical space for the stadium that could be built there, that it would change the characteristics of the site being the Gordon Faber Recreational Complex to remove the uniqueness of the site that is attracting local tournament organizers. The sense that it stops being what has come to be considered the Gordon Faber Recreational Complex, all its benefits that it currently has, if the stadium is put in. I think that there could be an argument to be made, that it would change the characteristics of the site.
It's not changing, that's a different criteria, changing the character of the area, this is the characteristics of the site are suitable for the use.
Yeah.
So it's just phrasing wise, I think so what you're saying is that because those fields are there and would be eliminated if the characteristics are not suitable, then. Or is that just a concern you're raising and you don't have a specific one side or the other of that argument?
The argument that I was making was initially in support of Ms. DeLaw's. However, I recognize the vagueness of what I'm saying, not directly supporting it. Blame that on the time of evening.
I think the loss of fields is contrary to the standard, but they will be replaced. It is a short term, the statement, the testimony was that those tournaments are gonna leave, they're gonna go elsewhere. But I think on balance, this standard is met. There's enough suitability on this site because it allows use of those same parking and transportation. It brings a lot of people into this facility. The tournaments will be replaced, so that is only a short-term loss. The field will be replaced, sorry, not the tournaments. The tournaments may go away, but I think other likely not, but others are gonna come back in the dearth of facilities in the region generally. Constantly hearing about there's not enough fields in other jurisdictions. Don't want to go there. That's evidence outside the record, so I withdraw that. But that's just my thoughts.
Well, as it's worded, the characteristics of the site are suitable for proposed initial use. I mean, they are, yes. If you're not supposed to.
I think here we can strike that balance. We can do balancing here. Because it's the characteristics of the existence of those existing fields are part of the character of the site.
Right.
So I think this is where your argument is relevant. And do you think on balance it's not met because those fields are there and will be temporarily lost?
Right, they would be temporarily lost,
Yeah.
but. So, again, like just thinking about, sorry, I was just thinking about this. If these fields, so they're still in conversation about how they're gonna replace this.
Mhm.
If there was already a plan, like, how these are going to be replaced, or they have already been replaced, then yeah, I don't want fine. There's no loss over there, but yeah, I think that if we cannot balance it in item number 3, in the criteria 3, then this is definitely where we can look at it. Like the characteristics, yeah, they're not suitable for the proposed conditional use because of the existing softball fields that will be removed for this project.
So your conclusion is that on balance, this criteria is not met because.
Right.
Okay.
And again, so just to clarify, again, this was a project that was not impacting anything, but on a site which did not have any. Item 3 and 4 in my mind would be fine and great to go with because there are so many other complexities. These things have become an issue, and yeah, and 5 as well. But yeah, we can go to 5.
But let's stay on 4 for a minute.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Before we move to number 5, Mr. Turner, may I see the document you're holding?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think 5's on the next page.
No, I'm just looking at the I just have, what I have for my reference for this approval criteria is simply the statement or the sentence, the characteristics of the site are suitable for the proposed CU. But I see here that you have examples in italics. Okay. So I'm just.
And it's out of the code.
It's saying the size, shape, location, topography, and location of improvements and natural features. I think depending on how we interpret characteristics and suitable, I'm not really sure. I clearly, as stated previously, I think I agree with the human element that you're trying to insert in here, Mr. Wall. And I think I'm also trying to find a space for where that is coming into play within these criteria. I'm trying to figure out if I agree with your definition or your interpretation of criteria 4, and that I'm having a bit of pause on. The location of improvements, I'm not really certain what that details here, because there are pre-existing improvements to the site. And we're talking about the fields 4, 5, and 6 of the GFRC, which would not make the stadium being placed on top of those essentially suitable. But I'm not really sure how we are limiting the definitions of these characteristics.
I get the word. I think what Mr. Lal's argument would be is location of improvement. Those fields are an improvement that are underneath where the stadium is going to go. So it is one of the characteristics of the site. I think it's a balancing issue. That is the loss of those fields more. Retention of those fields more important than the gain from this facility.
Mr. Sherman, could you expand on what you mean when you say balancing issue here? Obviously I know that you are referring to kinds of statements that we've been making before with regard to the loss of the field, but I'm curious how you're defining that statement with regard to criteria 4.
Yeah. Is the site unsuitable, on balance and unsuitable because those fields are there and will be lost temporarily? Or is it suitable because there are other the size, shape, location, topography of this facility allows it to be placed there and it can accommodate this facility?
Can I ask a question to this? When you're saying the characteristics of a site are suitable for proposed conditional use, are we talking about just the stadium or are we talking about the whole complex?
It's specific to the major assembly facility within the complex. So I mean, if you look at the response and the finding from staff, the response was that the use, so that's the major assembly facility, is consistent with what is in place at the complex. So it's saying that it is suitable for what is already within the complex. If I may, relevant to the discussion on the replacement, so in the applicant's final rebuttal in the AKS memo on page 2 of 3, the final paragraph, the applicant was specific that they have presented the plan to replace the fields to the Parks and Rec Commission, who formally adopted the recommendation at their August 29th. So that is in the, I mean, their responses in the record. The recommendation that was made to the Parks and Rec Commission is also public record. And then that recommendation will be presented to the City Council at an upcoming meeting. And also to reiterate that there is a condition of approval number 6 that speaks to sequencing of next steps relative to that replacement. So if the concern is about, I mean, set aside for a minute the short-term loss, but if the concern relative to the suitability of the site is related to, is there a commitment, where would these fields be replaced? I think the applicant has responded to that in detail in their final rebuttal.
That's another thing that I've been stuck on as to whether or not the argument that Mr. Law's making and that I previously have been making, whether or not that fits criteria 4 as I'm continuing to deliberate on. And I'm wondering if there is room in that criteria. I'm erring on not, but I'm not certain as to whether the human element of the tournament organizers at least two of the three mentioning a strong possibility to guarantee that they would not be returning here. One said if they were to be established in the interim time in another location. I'm wondering if that at all fits. Because in some way, we've also, this is a slight departure, but you know, through the quarantine, through the 2 years, we have seen a number of changes to public use of facilities and public engagement with certain things that have yet to come back. They might be increasing. For example, during the quarantine, TriMet lost maybe 2/3 of their ridership, and it's starting to come back. But in this time, which is a fairly significant amount of time, we've yet to see that sort of an increase. And that's all beside the point, but I'm using that to connect my thoughts as to the likelihood that these tournament organizers will come back, or if there will be more tournament organizers within a reasonable period of time. And the longer that it takes for those organizers to potentially consider coming back, that might be factored into the implied value that can be gained or lost through the retention or loss of these fields for the sake of the at the stadium. I just don't think that that's applicable for criteria 4.
So, broad the scope, do you feel that criteria 4 matter or not?
At the current moment, I believe that criteria 4 is met.
I just have one question. I know we're talking about the loss of use of the fields. But we're not really talking about also the loss of use of the existing baseball stadium. There will be some loss of use of that as well. Is that right? Because right now it's being used for, I'm not, please correct me if I'm wrong, the Hops are using it for Hillsboro Hops games. We got invited for one of them for that, but yes, we are replacing the fields, but there's a loss of use of the existing stadium. But has that been addressed at all or thought about it in that? And that's the reason I was asking, are we just looking at the site where the stadium is getting replaced, or are we looking at the whole complex?
So the applicant has put into the record the positive impact of the Hops as a tenant moving into a new stadium. There is an additional softball field that is behind the stadium, the round hockey field, sorry, that is restricted to use when the Hops are playing. And so with the Hops, you know, theoretically moving into a new stadium, that field will be more open for public use. And then the round hockey field itself, while the Hops would be moving, it does offer opportunities for other public events to occur in the stadium. I agree with you, Board Member DeWall, that the economics of that have not been specifically identified, but the opportunity for Ron Tonkin to provide public benefit in the future, I think the applicant has addressed that in their response.
Yeah, I have
I think you feel that criteria.
I don't know, I need a little bit of time. And then we can go to the next one.
Okay. Number 5 is the proposed conditional use will not change the character of the surrounding area in a way which limits or precludes use of surrounding properties consistent with the provisions of the underlying zone.
I think the key word there is the surrounding properties, which does not include the other fields at the location of the recreational complex. That's referring to other things within the IP zone. So I believe that criteria would be met.
Yeah, okay.
But you can go ahead, well,
I I would agree, I think. Considering just the surrounding properties, we have no, it's exempt from noise, but it's a significant distance away as well. The lights are subject to regulation, it will comply with those. Are gonna generate additional traffic beyond set what's there now.
Now, when we are discussing the surrounding properties, are we, obviously, we're including other industrial park properties. Are we also including the residential district that is across the freeway?
Yeah, that would be a
We are-
surrounding property if
Okay.
if those impacts go that far.
Okay. That's something that because we don't have further supporting evidence for, we have proposals for like sound mitigation with the construction of the new stadium, but because we don't have any hard evidence or suggestions on whether or not the uses of the new stadium would
But noise is exempt under code, so I don't think it's something we can consider, because that was a policy choice by the board. Just an example of a potential impact, but I don't think it's something we can consider.
even if hypothetically it would limit or preclude use of the residential area due to potential noise concerns?
I don't see how we can.
Okay.
Because it's expressly exempt, but because it's exempt, it's a city-owned facility, that's why it's exempt, because the city's gonna operate it and ensure that it doesn't have those significant impacts. A
Similar-
private operator's got a financial incentive to turn it up to 11.
So similar to the reasons why a traffic impact analysis isn't being required to be made because it doesn't suit, or because when the GFRC was initially made, the traffic impact analysis was done with the limit of 7,000 spectators at the time, which has not changed. In the same way, this area, which has a noise exception, that's not subject to noise limitations, when it was, I guess, zoned that way or created, it was always done with the expectation.
It's just because it's a public facility,
Okay,
if this was located anywhere, it would be exempt.
Right.
Because it's public. Because it's publicly owned and operated,
Mhm.
and again, there's that incentive to make sure you're not annoying the neighbors, because they're gonna come to the city council meeting.
okay. Yeah, I think,
So do we think criteria 5 is met?
yes.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Criteria 6 is the proposed conditional use addresses adequacy of transportation systems and public facilities disturbances that exist or plan for the area affected by the use. I think we previously just included that with that.
Yes.
And 7 is the proposed conditional use satisfies any applicable goals and policies of the comprehensive plan.
Mhm.
We think that's met.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we,
So prior to the recess that we had, we were talking about criteria of approval, or condition of approval number 3.
But that was, yeah, the 7,000 cap. Yeah.
I think we'd get to come to a conclusion on that one.
Yeah, I think we'll get to that. After we go through the criteria. Yeah, then
Did we not just finish the 7 criteria of approval?
Yeah, we still have the 1240.210D standards for places of assembly.
Okay.
Yes, we will definitely get to that. So criteria 1 there is it complied with applicable code, the international building code. I think that's totally. Okay. Criteria 2 is parking and internal vehicle circulation. That I think that's met because of the cap.
that's right.
Okay, so there's agreement that that's met. Setbacks doesn't apply because it's not residential height, it's met, it's certain objective standard. And 6. I'm sorry, that was. Height was 4. 5 is. Yeah, not applicable because it applies to schools. So on to the conditions. Condition 1, where there was no questions there. Condition 2, there was no. It kind of related. 2 and 3 are kind of related, but I think so. Let's go on to 3. That's where the questions arise. Go ahead, Ms. Lewin. You were having,
Since I've not read over it since prior to the 10-minute break that we had, I will need to look over it again.
go ahead, go for it.
So with the sentence, if the applicant wants to conduct single and concurrent events exceeding 7,000 spectators on more than 36 days in a calendar year, development review approval is needed. That means essentially that once the 37th day were to hypothetically hit, the development review approval would kick in. And then the development review board, I guess, would be.
They'd have to do a traffic, the applicant would have to do a traffic study and probably get the primary consequence there.
But it doesn't necessarily preclude the additional uses over the 36, the 36 days in the calendar year limit after the development review approval is correct.
If the development review board approved, found that the standard was
Right.
met,
Mhm.
then this 36 limit would go away. Hypothetically, if there would probably still be some limit, there would maximum capacity, then there's 6,000 spectators at this one, 10,000 at Hillsboro Stadium, and I think 5,500 at the Tonkin, and whatever that adds up to. Let's say 20,000, something like that. They would have to do a traffic study showing that traffic from 20,000 person or spectator events, there's enough capacity in the existing transportation system to accommodate that. If they did show that, and they would have to provide improvements to, they might have to provide improvements to the road system to accommodate that additional traffic.
Okay.
But then they could have up to 20,000 people at a time.
I think that it's better to leave condition of approval number 3 in as opposed to taking it out. Because it does provide for the future possibility of a traffic impact analysis. Should we be seeing a series of events being scheduled that would exceed, if we were to see the site use increase, whether over time, whether immediate, we would still have that traffic impact analysis. I think we should keep it, and I think that we should adopt the change in wording that we see on page 203 in the AKS statement.
I agree with that. Do you both agree with the 10% of the year? And is that something that we're all thinking that's the correct number before they can do a development review or traffic impact analysis?
I would agree that it seems arbitrary, it's pulled out of the air, but it's agreed to by the applicant so that it does limit the entire facility. So I think it's appropriate. I would keep it.
I also agree that it's pretty completely arbitrary, but so is any other number that we want to have. And it's good to have a number that is reasonably low without being restrictively low, so that there is, for example, maybe a possibility that we won't see this hypothetical 37th day in a calendar year be met for some number of years. Maybe it's met next year, but it provides, I think, a significant enough gap that there's some play before this condition were to come into effect. I think that it's as good as any other number.
I agree. Anybody have any other concern with the other conditions? Or was the light will height up to 150? Right. Barry, is 150 feet what they are actually proposing? Yes, it's 80 feet, it's an exemption, that's what I'm, okay. Then it'd be limited to 2-foot candles. I think if we prove this, we should add that. I'm really trying to read my note. Never mind. Something completely different. If for condition 4, we would need to add that the applicant, provide a lighting plan for approval through at least a type 2 process by the city, because that's what the code expressly requires. I think that could occur through the development review process, as long as it's at least a type 2 process.
What is a type 2?
Type 2 is public notice and opportunity to comment without a public hearing, so it's written.
Okay,
The city would send out notice to neighbors within the same distance, and they would be able to comment in writing, and then that could be appealed to. Appealed to a public hearing by somebody.
okay,
I'm sure.
Mr. Turner, if you want to simplify this, you could just say the development, this will require development.
Yeah.
Right,
And is that a type 2?
it is.
Okay,
You
that-
can just
that-
say that instead of prior to development review, the development review application shall include a lighting plan pursuant to CDC 12.50.240. So just make it part of that development review application.
That's what I was trying to do, but I appreciate, cut to the chase. Development review application shall include a lighting plan, hang on, I'll get to that. And I have to make sure this is legible. Shall include a lighting plan demonstrating compliance with
They are just pursuant to
pursuant to
CDC 12.50.240.
12. Can I have that number again?
12.50.240.
40, thank you.
And so, Chair, or hearings officer Turner, just to relate a couple of conditions. So as you look at condition of approval number 5, that's the overall condition that says this facility will need to go through development review. So that's the next step in the process. Condition of approval number 4 already references prior to development review approval, the applicant shall demonstrate compliance with these standards. So you just need to add language in there through providing a lighting plan and then reference the CDC section. And the other thing I wanted to
I'm
clarify.
sorry, where would I add that to condition 5?
No, number 4, the end of the second sentence.
Oh, that's all one sentence. Okay, great. Compliance with shall be verified by the planning division. I would add at the end of that development review application shall include the lighting plan. What was the exact word you said?
So that sentence starts prior to development review approval, the applicant shall demonstrate compliance with these standards, which is right
There, okay, there it is. I'm sorry. So I was in the wrong spot. Okay, just keep going with what you were saying.
through providing a lighting plan with the application, and then you could reference the CDC section.
Okay, shall demonstrate through a lighting plan. Right, thank you.
And I also just want to make sure it's clear, when you all were discussing the development review application and the process relative to condition of approval number 3, that type 2 process, there is no board. So the reviewing authority for that development review application is staff. So there is no board. The appeal body for a development review application is the planning commission. And then if it's appealed from there, it goes to Land Use Board of Appeals. Thank you. The other thing, just so we're clear in agreeing to the language in condition of approval number 3, I just want to make sure that you're all in concurrence with the language that's in condition of approval number 2, because they are tied together with the 36 days.
Yes, I think condition 2 is appropriate.
With the slight modification to add the word
Yes,
year.
years. Thank you. Yes, definitely add year. Does everybody agree with that?
I would agree as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So 4 will add, we'll modify, we agree we need to modify 4 as Mr. Barry just suggested.
Sorry, can I ask the staff one question?
Sure.
The DR application. So once the applicant submits the traffic impact analysis to reevaluate internal and outside impact. What else would that entail? Would it be like, for example, if they have to put a signal or add more sidewalks, or I don't know. So they would have to do all of that for approval?
So I'm going to defer to Joseph to answer the specifics of what's in the transportation impact analysis, but I should also describe the sequence here because we're referencing the same type of application for next steps. So the facility itself, or if you all condition it 36 days per calendar year, the applicant is still required to go through development review approval to get approval of the actual facility, how it will be built, where the plaza will be, all that lighting, regardless of the 36 days. And then following that approval, following construction, if they then want to exceed the 36 days, then they will need to go back through the development review process. At that point, all we will really be looking at is the transportation impact analysis. So Joseph can talk to you about what's in that analysis and what the repercussions of that analysis may be.
For the records, just Boston City and Hillsboro Transportation Systems Engineer. The traffic impact analysis will, first initially we'll look at the existing conditions surrounding the site. There will be a identified study area. That study area is going to be based on a 10% threshold of the traffic volumes generated in the site on top of what's the existing road volume, roads of the adjacent roadways that surround the site. So it would be evaluating the existing conditions. We'll look at the behind capacity ratio, the delay at several of the study intersections, as well as queuing. And then it would move forward into looking at the background conditions, which is the year of opening of the site, which is usually like 1 or 2 years out. Any in-process volumes that are coming in from other prior adopted land use applications in the area. And then what the operations of that would be, looking at behind capacity ratio, delay, queuing. And then the next step in that traffic analysis would look at the trip generation that's proposed from this site and the dispersion or distribution of that traffic on the different study area intersections, and then analyze what the behind capacity ratio is and the delay and the queuing. And so the thing I would look at would be our criteria that is listed in Community Development Code 12.70.200, and then looked at whether it meets our behind capacity ratio and delay thresholds in there. If it's exceeding, then we'll look at whether it's exceeding beyond, but it was determined for the exceedance and the background conditions of the report, and then from there it would be determined if any mitigation would be needed that is associated with at this site, and at what particular intersections would range from different variations of things, such as traffic signals or turn lanes, etc. But you wouldn't all that is in speculative until we would have that report prepared by the applicant's traffic consultant team.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation. So until the report will be prepared, and then whatever the report says, until they do that, they will not get an approval for that application.
They would be able to have more
More than
events.
7.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that year.
they will need to submit the traffic impact analysis for the application to be deemed complete, and then we'll review it for the quality of the report. And if the quality report is good, then it doesn't need to go through a second review. If it doesn't meet our quality control, then it gets sent back to the applicant then to make modifications, and then they send it back, and then we review it, and then based on what we see from if there's any potential impact to the site, that's where we start putting conditions of approval down for those transportation improvements that are needed to facilitate traffic on the site.
All right, thanks. That's helpful.
Okay, does anybody have any concern with the other conditions?
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, referring to condition of approval of the board. Was there at some point during this meeting that we were discussing something about the sky pollution?
Oh, night sky friendly lighting, yes. It's not in the code for this It was in the original condition of approval, I thought. The staff recommended a night sky friendly, that the lights be night sky friendly, I think was the phrasing. Is that right?
It's in the condition of approval, that the lighting shall be dark sky.
Dark sky, thank you. Is it? Is it condition 4?
Yeah. It's the second one.
It does not have that
I
word.
may have dropped it, but I couldn't copy it over.
You want,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I dropped that because staff asked us to drop it, and so when I just did, when I copied it over, thank you.
Is that your fault?
It could be. Although I didn't send her my copy. I think we need to eliminate dark sky friendly language, definitely.
it's
To
good.
eliminate it.
Because, yes, because the code doesn't require it and it's not feasible to comply. It does require it in one particular area of the city, one of the sub areas. Like when I Googled dark sky friendly on the code, it did come up in. It's not South Hillsboro, but something like that, one of the specific areas. It doesn't apply here, but the code doesn't require it. So they are required to meet the lighting standards of the city, which is the language we suggested adding, and they have to provide lighting plan to that effect, but it doesn't have to be dark sky friendly.
Is there anything like a dark sky friendly light?
Yeah, they don't sign up. And they're shielded, so they're 8 downward. So when you've got 150-foot pole, that's pretty much possible.
So are we eliminating it because it's not possible or because it's not in the
The
code?
code doesn't require it. And because it's not possible.
But this is already a condition of approval relating to light poles that exceed the normal height allotment.
No, it was, the exceedance was for the exception. If it was less than 80 feet, it would be exempt from the lighting standards. Because it exceeds 80 feet, it's subject to the lighting standards. It's just, if it was a stadium, I think it's public facilities or a stadium, but it's there's an exemption for lights 80 feet or less for this type of facility, they're public or stadiums. It doesn't meet that exception because it's more than 80 feet, so it is subject to the lighting standards. The lighting standards don't require dark sky friendly lighting.
So in the standards, because it would not be exempt, the standards include both light trespass standards as well as shielding requirements. So that is what we would be confirming through the development process. And our shielding requirement is required of any light source or lamp that emits more than 900 lumens. And that shall be concealed or shielded with an illumination engineering society of North America full cutoff style fixture. So there will be shielding required because the project is not exempt from is not exempt from.
It doesn't fall within the exemption here.
So there will be shielding, but not up to any potential dark sky compliant standards, is that correct?
It might meet dark sky compliant standards. It's that engineering standard that he just referenced that might be what it requires, but that's what the city has adopted.
This condition 4 was it the applicant who, or was it the staff who recommended the dark sky?
So it was staff, and initially we were working under the presumption that the project would fall under the exceptions, but after a fair amount of back and forth, we landed that it would not, so then subject to the standards.
That's fine, I mean,
Any other issues with the conditions?
I know we said, okay, for condition 3, but after Kristen's, telling us to look at it again and then the explanation about the DR, can we at least condition these 36 days in a calendar year to be particular days and not like rush hour days? Could they at least weekends or something like that?
I think we're running into problems there because this is what the applicants agreed to. And there's that, if we don't have the applicant's agreement, we can't regulate the other facilities that are already there.
And I think that the most important thing with criteria 3 is that if the 36 calendar days are exceeded or are attempting to be, or if there is a desire to exceed them, then it would trigger a traffic review, traffic impact analysis.
The other issue with in rush hour days, rush hour times, they're gonna consider that in the parking and management or parking transportation, the special permit for those large uses.
The reason I brought this up and I thought about it because of the other application we reviewed, I'm sure you have said, we did put in some of these conditions that weekend, I don't exactly remember what those conditions were, but they were not allowed to like. I think there was a day threshold for that application, but I'm just wondering, I'm just thinking about like if there is an event or a Hawks game when on a Thursday evening, for example, during rush hour. Is there any way that we can prevent that here, or is that something that cities applicant?
I think with regard to the Shorey House that we had done earlier this year, I think that is because it was on within a residential neighborhood, and therefore it's downtown Hillsboro's residential roads are very small, so I think it was to try to avoid during the peak times that people would be getting home, there being significant delays, but I'm not sure that that is necessarily applicable here when the recreational complex is off of the freeway and when Hawks games have already been occurring on weekdays.
And I think the required permit analysis is gonna address that, you know, if it's generating traffic during rush hour,
Right.
it's not gonna get approved because there's gonna be too much congestion. So it's more likely it is.
The traffic management plan. is gonna
Yeah.
address
Yeah, right. Thank you. That's what I was trying to say.
that. Okay.
So yeah, just to reiterate, I think that adopting the language on page 2 of 3 for the AKS
Yes.
statement is what I would move toward doing.
So with that, it seems to me that we've agreed, let's come back to the criteria for.
Quickly, regarding the other criteria, so for criteria 6, for example, we're already seeing some progress toward that. Saw a plan I saw mentioned has been submitted. Is there any further strictness that we can have on criteria 6? For example, anything,
Do you need conditions or?
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay.
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 No, that's fine.
Condition 6, the prior to issuance of building permits, et cetera. Is there any further strictness that we might be able to impose? Something that I would like to do, if possible, if the stadium is going to be approved, is I would like to try to have some temporary loss of use mitigation put in place before these 3 fields are ever lost to begin with. Because even if they're substandard fields that are being used, if we do have something, then we might be able to further mitigate the loss of the tournament organizers. And if there's any further strictness we can put on this to try to get that to happen.
Can we put that for a second? Because
Yes.
you triggered another thought. Didn't the applicant suggest some revised language for condition 6 that because they've got this plan in place, or they coming up with I thought there was some revised language at some point.
They did, and unfortunately, we won't be able to get their concurrence. The way I read the final paragraph on page 2 of the memo that was submitted with their final rebuttal. That was
Something the AS one,
correct.
page 2, final paragraph.
Final paragraph.
Yep.
After they talked about the Parks and Rec Commission adopting recommendation, they then go on to say the recommendation will be presented to City Council. And this is the most important sentence, quote, with the recommended condition of approval, number 6, the mitigation plan for lost fuel use will be required to be adopted by the City Council before the new stadium is in use. I read that to be in concurrence with the language as it stands.
The certificate of occupancy would be allowing use, yeah. Okay,
Can I ask a couple of questions regarding that? At what point before? This is important because we should know what the development timeline is for this, how long the loss of use is going to be for those fields. And it says the plan to the city council for consideration and implementation. So does it mean like implementation in terms of the ball fields will be already constructed prior to the certificate of occupancy, or what does the implementation mean?
The way that the condition is worded is that the applicant shall present the plan to the city council for how they will implement the replacement, not that the implementation will occur prior to the certificate of occupancy.
So my concern here is mainly that if construction period for this starts sometime next year, the fields goes down, or in 2025 or 2 years, until they get the certificate of occupancy, until the building has been constructed and they're ready to occupy it, there only needs to be consideration and implementation, but no actual work on the loss of fields. I mean, it would be that by the time this thing gets constructed, the fields also are constructed at the same time. And yeah, that's what.
the applicant's testimony was that construction of those other fields are gonna take about 3 years because they have to get approvals for those other sites.
And all the more reason they should have happened concurrently, because otherwise we're looking at like a 6-year timeline versus just a 3-year timeline. And then the loss of use, and which is why what's currently happening in those fields might never come back if there is a loss of use for 3 years. So there has to be a cap on when these approvals can happen and when construction for the fields can start, and they
So
should
that
start concurrently.
That would prevent this from being built during, within the deadline required for Major League by Major League Baseball.
I recognize the urgency that the Hawks have to have a stadium that meets the high A requirements for Major League Baseball. However, I feel like we should also be placing perhaps equal significance on retaining on preventing an extended period of time of loss of use. I feel like with respect to the Hawks, I do very much appreciate them and their contributions to the city of Hillsboro. I think that whether or not the building can be built to meet the timeline also falls outside the purview of our approval of this application. And I think that for us to approve this application, if there is any possible way that we can do this, I think that we should minimize, if not eliminate, the amount of time that we have to wait before these 3 fields before 3 fields or their equivalents can be put back into use by the people of Hillsboro and tournament organizers.
Coming back to your prior question, I don't think we can require temporary facility because there's no evidence about how or where those can be approved. It would require land use approval, it would still be delays. I don't think it's something we could propose. As far as the other requiring a replacement, actual replacement, I don't see what criteria that meets. It has to be that condition has to be necessary to meet one of these criteria. And as we discussed, the approval criteria.
So then,
Balancing doesn't come into any of these approval criteria.
so then the opinion by the board as to whether or not, for example, criteria 4 is met also determines whether or not we
Okay,
can.
so that it arguably would fall within that one.
I mean, what is stopping the city from doing these? So doing these projects.
Building those
on-
other,
Yeah, or
Yeah.
starting the process of permits approval, construction at the same time, the Hillsboro Hops are doing their stadium. What is stopping those processes from happening concurrently?
I think it. Yeah, have any comment?
You know, we're hindered a bit by the deliberation that we can't have the applicant weigh in. Chris Berry, I'll say that since I haven't been reiterating my name along the way. I know that there's significant permitting involved because of the environmentally sensitive areas of the complex that the new fields would be placed on. I can't speak directly to why that process can't start now. I mean, I presume that the process that the applicant team has to go through is to get the city council's concurrence with the Parks and Recreation Commission's recommendation on how the loss of use will be done. And then hire consultants and consulting team to go through that permitting process. I can't speak to why that can't occur simultaneously with the permitting for the stadium portion.
Yeah, given that this is the city's the applicant, not a private applicant, I think the city's got a strong incentive to make this happen. Get those approvals through, so I don't know that adding a condition requiring that is necessary. If this was a private applicant, they wouldn't have any of that same incentive without a condition. That's just my thoughts.
I mean, then why would adding condition number 6 is not really necessary because we're trusting the city to do it.
It's provide some kind of guarantee. So how would you rephrase condition 6 then? Present, prior to issuing the building permits,
I mean, present the plan to the city council for consideration and implementation prior to the certificate of occupancy. Seems like
because they have
it's
presented
really
that plan.
nothing.
They're in the process of presenting that plan at the upcoming meeting. According to guess is September 1st.
Isn't that already happening even before? Isn't that what the
That's what AKS says is happening right now, that they're already they're way ahead of they're getting that plan before final occupancy.
right, so instead of saying prior to the certificate of occupancy, I would say prior to the sort of commencement, that's the thing.
Like
Prior to issuance of building permits.
Yeah, prior to
to
issuance of
groundbreaking
building
or-
permits.
Building permits would allow groundbreaking, so yeah, same,
Yeah.
I think that would be the same effect. So are you recommending that we prior to issuance of building permits, the applicant the city council shall adopt a loss of use plan?
Well, the same thing what they have said, present the plan to the city council, great consideration and implementation prior to
Building permit.
issuance of building permits for the ballpark.
Mhm.
And then I would also add. Can you tell again what implementation means?
So the way the condition is worded is that the applicant would present the plan to the city council, how they would implement the loss of use. And that it's not saying that the actual implementation, so the physical construction of those replacement fields will be done ahead of the occupancy. So it's just the plan for implementation, it's not the actual implementation.
Would the plan for implementation include permitting, environmental
Correct.
assessments and all of that?
It would. Yes, I think that you all are seeking to revise the condition so that it is tied to permitting. I would just ask for specificity there. It's important to distinguish between permits for grading and erosion control versus permits for vertical construction. So if you're wanting to tie it to
Like,
when the land will be disturbed and the fields will
that is
stop,
permits, is that what it's called? Like,
you could say prior to the issuance of site development permits, you can see in condition of approval number 5, we're specific to all of the permits. So if you wanted to be that specific, you could say prior to the issuance of a grading and erosion control permit.
Is that the first permit that happens?
It is.
I see why I'm confused is the applicant at some point did suggest some alternative language, and that's what I poured it in.
Okay.
So I didn't have that implementation worded, and that's why I was so confused.
Oh, sorry.
No, not your fault, mine, it's entirely. So what the applicant suggests was prior to the issue of the building permits, the applicant shall present a plan to recover the lost use associated with the removal of fields 4, 5, and 6. And so far, that's exactly what they've said.
Do we need to,
And they shall prior to present a plan to the city council for consideration. And then city council shall adopt a loss of use plan prior to issue certificate of occupancy. Here, city council present a plan for consideration and implementation prior to certificate of occupancy. Okay. So what are you saying we should say?
right, instead of certificate of occupancy, why don't we just say prior to the grading and site erosion control permits?
Yeah. Okay.
So that would like bump up the timeline a lot.
Yep.
What is the construction time period? Do we have that information? Don't have it.
I believe we have from the last meeting, we have we have the deadline by which the hops would need the stadium to be completed, and we have an approximate timeline of, I think, 1 to 3 years, how long it would take for replacement fields to be put into effect. Or to be finished and ready
Right,
for
so
use.
if we do implement it, it probably would happen kind of at the same time. Because after permitting, it's probably 1.5 years, I don't even know how much time it would be, but. So if implementation means permitting, getting the environmental assessment and all of that stuff, then yeah, I think. Does that need to be, do you think we need to elaborate on that?
Let's get a bit more specific here for a second. What exactly are you trying to have happen with the wording of condition of approval number 6?
I'm trying to have happen, the loss of replacing fields 4, 5, and 6. Pumped up in the timeline. So if you do it, for example, if you're doing it with the certificate of occupancy, it's not gonna happen. So that implementation is not gonna happen for a couple of years. So this time.
With the original, or with what you were saying, certificate of occupancy, or of occupancy, you're saying that essentially under that timeline, the building could be built, but then the occupants could not occupy it prior to.
Yeah, but they can't have games there until, whereas here, they have to put a plan in before they can get grading and erosion, before they can move dirt.
Okay.
Even the permit.
I would agree with that.
So that really, I feel in my mind that really like addresses especially like the concerns I had about criteria 3, the loss of use, because if it's just a couple of months or maybe a year that we're talking about where it's a displacement, that's temporary. But if you're saying 3 or 4 years and you really don't have a plan, then that's problematic. I don't know. Does the staff have any comments?
No, I mean, again, back to what the applicant has submitted in their final rebuttal, they've already identified that this process is occurring. They are going to city council with a plan that describes the implementation steps. So, they're ahead of the original intent of this condition. So tying it to the issuance of the grading and erosion control permit, would make sense.
And is there a possibility for staff to inform us as to whether or not the fields 4, 5, and 6 would continue to be able to be in use prior to the issuance of the grading and erosion control permit?
I would think they would, because until you're moving dirt, the fields are there.
Well, yeah, I would definitely say that the fields will stay in use up until, I mean, so.
up until dirt begins to be moved.
Correct, yeah, if the permit gets issued, then they need to mobilize, and I think it's like ready for construction, so I'm guessing up until mobilization of the construction equipment, the fields will remain in use, and I suspect that if there's leaks or other things occurring on those fields, that the Parks and Rec staff will manage that and make sure that those leaks cease ahead of mobilization.
Okay. Yeah, I think I think the wording that we just tried to implement, I think that's good. I would agree with that.
Great, a great suggestion. It definitely does move it up, and there is a specific deadline, that's what I was having trouble with, okay, that's a specific deadline.
I'm just worried a little bit about the application, but I'm gonna trust that actually means like doing all of the stuff required and then getting permit for.
As long as the majority of us
Permit
are
for.
agreeing that, that the criteria of approval 1 through 7 are being met, particularly number 4, then yeah, that's the most that we can do is trust that the timeline is going to be what we're hoping it is.
Given that, I think I would move that we approve this application subject to the conditions with the revision we just talked about, specifically.
Right.
Go ahead.
Prior to this, Ms. Dalal, I believe the last time that we were discussing the criteria of approval, you were still expressing doubt as to whether or not criteria 4 was being met. How do you feel about that now?
I feel better about it. However, I was just going to say to number 6, is there any, and I would ask the staff this question. So there is a lot of use of the softball fields, but also the loss of use of the existing stadium. But is there any way that we could assign during construction that Ron Tonkin and the field behind it that you were talking about could be used for softball or as a temporary replacement for 4, 5, and 6?
Ms. Dahl, you might clarify what you mean by the loss of use for Ron Tonkin Field, because I don't think in the application materials or what board or the staff have received that there's a loss of use of those fields, that's a regaining of that capacity as the move happens. So I just want to make sure we answer your question correctly.
Oh, so this is just tying back to what I was saying before, that there is a loss of use because the stadium is going on these particular sites, but if you're talking about the whole complex, there's also, because we're building the same use right next to another stadium, there's a loss of use. So Hillsboro Hops is not going to use Ron Tonkin anymore, they will use the new stadium. And that way there is a loss of use for that existing stadium.
Understand. I think from the review staff standpoint, we look at it as capacity to use events. And so while the Hops wouldn't be using both facilities, our understanding from the materials that the applicant has provided is that the existing Ron Tonkin Field, once the Hops relocate to the new facility, that facility goes back into the broader public programming of the complex and could be used by local sports groups, tournament hosts.
Which is what I was trying to get at. Can that be a temporary measure that can implement for fields 4, 5, and 6?
I don't think it is, because the Hops are gonna continue to use for the Ron Tonkin during construction. They have nowhere else to go.
Is there any possibility for us to add as a criteria or as a condition of approval, that once the Hops Stadium is built, then the Ron Tonkin Field would be open to public?
I think it just will be.
Okay.
I don't think we need a condition for that. It's goes back to it's the city's facility that can article whatever the word is, they'll schedule things there.
Okay.
I don't think a condition's necessary.
So just to be explicit, Ms. Dalal, do you feel that criteria 4 has been met?
I think it will be met. But I feel more confident that it will be met.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I would again move that we approve the application subject to conditions recommended by staff with the following amendments, that condition 2, we add a year, calendar year, in 2 places, that condition 3 be modified as stated on page 2 of the AKS memorandum. It's September 1st memorandum from AKS. That condition 4 be amended to read: the applicant's major assembly facility is allowed light poles up 150 feet high. Prior to development review approval, the applicant shall demonstrate through a lighting plan pursuant to 1240 the light poles compliant with aviation height regulations and elimination of property line that is no greater than 2 foot. Line shall be there. The rest of the language, and that. Oh, and then we eliminate the dark sky friendly language from condition 4, and that condition 6 be revised to get the right one. Condition 6 shall be revised to require consideration, city council consideration and implementation of the lost fields plan prior to grading and erosion control.
Sorry, I think I lost the beginning of that statement with all of the rereadings of the conditions.
I move that we approve the application subject to the conditions that we just as revised that we just discussed.
Okay. I would second that.
I agree.
Okay. With that, we will approve the application subject to the revised conditions. We'll issue a written decision to that effect within 2 weeks at the most, really sooner. And that concludes our hearing. Thank you all. Thank you.